Dwayne Johnson had been looking forward to a quiet Saturday, a break from the constant buzz of movie sets and endless meetings. He didn't want the spotlight on him today, just some time to enjoy normal life. He wanted a new car, something sleek, practical, but also a little fun. So, he decided to head to a local dealership, hoping for a relaxing experience. But as soon as he stepped inside the shiny showroom, things took a turn. The moment Dwayne walked in, he noticed the manager, a middle-aged man named Rick, chatting with a group of customers. The atmosphere seemed tense, a far cry from the warm welcome one might expect. Dwayne smiled politely and wandered around, checking out the latest models, but Rick seemed to be ignoring him. After a few moments, Rick glanced over and walked toward Dwayne with a forced smile, clearly distracted. "Can I help you, sir?" Rick asked, barely meeting his eyes. "Yeah, I'm just looking around," Dwayne replied, his tone casual. Rick paused for a moment, sizing him up. Dwayne could tell that Rick was only half paying attention. "We're really busy today, so if you're just browsing, maybe come back later," Rick said dismissively before turning to walk away. Dwayne blinked in surprise. Was this guy serious? "No, I'm just looking at the models," Dwayne said again, trying to keep the conversation going. "I'm actually thinking of buying today." Rick turned back, his expression now clearly irritated. "Look, I said we're busy, okay?" he snapped. "If you're not serious about buying, I've got other customers to deal with." The words hung in the air for a second, and Dwayne's mind raced. He didn't like being treated that way, especially not when he had just come to have a normal day. With a tight smile, he nodded. "Fine, I'll head out then," Dwayne said, his tone even but with a touch of sarcasm. "Thanks for the hospitality." As he turned to leave, the door jingled as it swung open, and he was hit with the cool air outside. He stepped onto the sidewalk, his thoughts spinning. He didn't expect celebrity treatment all the time, but this was something else. He'd been snubbed by a manager at a car dealership, of all places. He couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Did he really think I was just some regular guy off the street? As he reached his car, Dwayne hesitated. He had planned to enjoy his day, not get into any drama. But that little exchange stuck with him. Was it possible that the dealership had been treating customers like this for a while? Dwayne could have left it alone. He could have brushed it off and gone about his day. But something inside him told him that this moment wasn't as insignificant as it seemed. Maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity to learn something more about what was happening behind the scenes. An opportunity to challenge himself in a new way. Before getting in his car, Dwayne pulled out his phone and made a quick call. The wheels were already turning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Dwayne Johnson didn't need to prove anything to anyone. After all, he was The Rock. But even the most successful people have moments of self-doubt, moments where they wonder how they got here and what really matters. His rise to fame hadn't been handed to him. It had been earned through sweat, grit, and countless sacrifices. Born in Hayward, California, Dwayne's early life was a far cry from the glitz and glamour he now enjoyed. He'd grown up with a deep love for wrestling, but also a sense of instability. His family moved a lot, and his father, a professional wrestler himself, was often absent. Dwayne didn't have the easiest childhood, but he always kept his head high. In high school, he was known as a football star with dreams bigger than the stadium. But it wasn't until his early 20s that Dwayne's life truly began to shift. He'd followed in his father's footsteps and entered the world of professional wrestling. At first, it was a struggle. His famous last name didn't guarantee him success. He had to prove himself, fight for every inch, and earn respect, something he learned the hard way in the ring. Eventually, his charisma and sheer force of will made him one of the biggest names in wrestling history. But even then, the road to superstardom wasn't easy. Dwayne faced doubts and setbacks. His transition from wrestling to acting was met with skepticism. Would audiences accept him as a serious actor, or was he just a wrestler trying to make it in Hollywood? For years, he was seen as just another action star, typecast in roles that didn't allow him to stretch his acting abilities. But Dwayne wasn't content with that. He wasn't satisfied being known as just the muscle. He wanted more. He wanted respect, depth, and to prove that he could do anything. And so, over the years, he built his brand, reinventing himself as a businessman, philanthropist, and a Hollywood powerhouse. He embraced the spotlight, but unlike many others, he never lost sight of where he came from. His father's struggles, his own hardships, they shaped him. Dwayne never forgot the importance of humility, of not letting fame and fortune define him. But it was moments like the one at the car dealership that reminded him how easy it was for people to judge others based on appearances, to treat people differently because of status or success. It was frustrating, but he'd learned to let it roll off his back. And yet, something about that encounter with Rick stung more than usual. Maybe it was because he wasn't looking for attention, just a chance to blend in, to be treated like anyone else. Maybe it was because Dwayne had spent his life being underestimated, and he knew what it felt like to be dismissed. He couldn't help but think of all the people who'd been mistreated by Rick, people who didn't have the fame and fortune to fight back. That was the thought that lingered in his mind as he drove away from the dealership. The experience wasn't just about a bad interaction. It was about the culture behind it, the way people were treated when no one was looking. And for some reason, Dwayne felt that he needed to be the one to do something about it. It didn't take long for Dwayne to gather the information he needed. He had his team look into the dealership's ownership, and when the news came in, it was almost too perfect. The dealership had been struggling. Their current owner was ready to sell, and with a few clever moves, Dwayne could secure it. At first, he'd planned on simply investing, maybe as a silent partner. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the best way to fix what was wrong at the dealership was to own it. Not just in terms of business, but in terms of culture. He could change things, not just for the manager, but for everyone who walked through those doors. He wanted to give people a place where they felt valued, where their time and money were respected. It wasn't just about cars. It was about creating an environment where people could walk in and know that they mattered. And the manager, Rick? Dwayne had a feeling that if he could turn things around for Rick, maybe the entire dealership could follow suit. As Dwayne made the final decision to move forward with the purchase, he couldn't help but smile to himself. He was about to turn this bad experience into something positive. He'd show Rick and everyone else what it truly meant to lead with respect. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Dwayne's reflection echoed in his mind. For him, it was the belief that no matter how high he climbed, it was never about the accolades. It was about the impact he left behind. And now, he was about to make an impact in a place no one would expect. The day after signing the papers, Dwayne found himself standing in front of the very dealership that had given him such a bitter taste. He hadn't yet revealed his identity to the staff or Rick. He was going to do this quietly, observe, and figure out exactly what was happening inside before making any drastic moves. The showroom's large windows glimmered in the morning sunlight, but Dwayne wasn't thinking about the cars today. He was thinking about people. How many others had come in here, only to be treated with disrespect, like he had been? His mind wandered back to that encounter with Rick. How dismissive and rude the manager had been, even though Dwayne was more than capable of buying the most expensive car in the showroom without a second thought. But it wasn't about the money. It was about how people treated each other. That's what stuck with him. As he stepped inside, the scent of new leather and polished chrome filled the air. It was the familiar smell of a car dealership, expensive and slick. A couple of salespeople were talking to customers, their voices just loud enough for him to overhear. "You know, we've had these cars for months," one salesperson said. "They've been sitting here because Rick hasn't been willing to cut deals. I mean, it's like he doesn't even want to make a sale. I heard he's been pretty tough to work with lately," the other person replied. "Something's up with him. I think he's just burned out. But who knows?" Dwayne stood there, quietly watching the interactions. A woman was trying to haggle over the price of a sedan, her voice polite but firm. Rick stood behind the desk, arms crossed, tapping his pen against the surface in annoyance. He wasn't even looking at her, instead glancing over at the clock every few seconds. "Look, lady, that's the best price I can offer. Take it or leave it," Rick said abruptly. The woman faltered, her face flushing slightly with frustration. "I'm just asking for a little flexibility here. I'm a repeat customer." Rick scoffed. "Yeah, well, we're all repeat customers around here. Don't expect any special treatment." Dwayne couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman, clearly embarrassed, turned to leave, looking down at the floor as she walked away. Dwayne watched the scene play out in silence, his gut twisting. He knew people like this. People who were so jaded by life's disappointments that they forgot the basic decency of treating others with respect. But Rick's problem wasn't just that he was rude. It was that he had forgotten the importance of genuine human connection. Dwayne didn't want to judge too quickly. He knew the toll stress could take on a person, but this was something else. This was a pattern, and that wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. He walked up to one of the salespeople who had been chatting earlier, a young man named Ethan, who seemed to be having a better day than the others. Ethan smiled at Dwayne, though he didn't seem to recognize him. "Hey, I was wondering if you could show me around a bit. I'm interested in a couple of cars, just browsing," Dwayne said casually, doing his best to blend in. "Of course, sir. What are you looking for today? Something sporty, maybe a sedan, or a truck?" Dwayne smiled. "Let's start with the trucks." As they walked around, Dwayne chatted with Ethan, asking questions about the vehicles and their features. But his mind kept drifting back to Rick. How many customers had come in here only to be treated like that woman had been? He could imagine the frustration of walking into a dealership, expecting a friendly, professional experience, only to be met with hostility. And then, something happened that Dwayne hadn't anticipated. As he stood next to a truck, admiring the sleek design, Rick approached them from behind, a clipboard in hand. He hadn't noticed Dwayne's face until he got closer, and when he did, his eyes widened. "Wait a second, are you?" Rick began, his voice faltering. Dwayne didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stared at the manager. Rick was clearly flustered, trying to piece together who this man was. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. "You're him, aren't you?" Rick's voice had a tone of disbelief. "You're Dwayne Johnson?" Dwayne gave a nod, his expression calm but firm. "Yes, that's me." For a moment, the air between them was thick with tension. Rick's face flushed with embarrassment. He had no idea who Dwayne was when they'd first met. He had no idea he was about to insult one of the most famous men in the world. Now, here he was, face to face with him, feeling every bit of his past arrogance. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Dwayne looked at him and simply said, "It's all right, but there's something you need to know. I've just purchased this dealership." Rick's jaw dropped. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the information. "Wait, you bought it?" Dwayne nodded slowly. "I did, and I'm going to make some changes around here. Things need to be different." Rick looked around, his nervousness palpable. I didn't mean to. Dwayne held up a hand. "You don't need to apologize to me, but you owe it to every customer who walks through that door to treat them with respect." Rick's eyes widened, realizing that his entire career at the dealership was hanging by a thread. I didn't know it was you," he stammered. "I know," Dwayne replied, "but it's not about who I am. It's about how you treat people. I want this place to be different. We're going to turn it around, but it starts with you." The words hung in the air between them. For the first time in a long time, Rick seemed to understand. It wasn't just about making sales. It was about building relationships, about changing the environment. Rick had let the pressures of work get to him, and now, he was faced with the reality that it was time to change or face the consequences. Dwayne turned away, but before he left, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "This dealership is going to be something special, but it's up to you whether you're part of that change." And with that, Dwayne walked out the door, leaving Rick to process the weight of the words. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that true change could come from within. And now, he was about to help Rick and the dealership learn that lesson. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and planning. Dwayne had a vision for the dealership, but it was clear that transforming the environment wasn't going to be easy. The staff needed to be on board, and Rick needed more than just a wake-up call. He needed guidance, and Dwayne wasn't going to let him slip through the cracks. Dwayne sat in his new office, an office that had once belonged to the previous owner of the dealership. It was a space that felt stiff and impersonal, much like the dealership itself. He looked out the large windows, scanning the lot full of new cars, and wondered just how many customers had walked through those doors and felt dismissed, just like he had. As the hours passed, Dwayne made it clear that his plan wasn't just about selling cars. It was about creating a place where people could feel welcome, valued, and respected. He knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but change had to start from the top. Rick hadn't spoken much since their conversation, but Dwayne noticed him hanging around the office, looking lost. It was clear that Rick was struggling to figure out his place now that things had shifted. To his credit, he hadn't walked out. He was still here, which meant there was hope. Late one afternoon, Dwayne walked into the dealership's lounge to grab a coffee, only to find Rick standing by the coffee machine, staring into his cup. He didn't look like the confident manager who dismissed him a few days ago. He looked more like a man who was realizing how deep he'd buried himself in his own cynicism. "You okay?" Dwayne asked casually as he grabbed a mug and filled it with coffee. Rick looked up, his expression a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he muttered. Dwayne took a sip of his coffee and leaned against the counter, watching him. "What do you mean?" Rick ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling. "I've been running this place for years, but it feels like I've been doing it all wrong. I've been so focused on the numbers and the pressure from the top to make sales that I forgot what really matters: treating people with respect. I've been pushing customers away instead of bringing them in." Dwayne nodded slowly. He understood exactly where Rick was coming from. "It's easy to get lost in the hustle," he said. "But here's the thing. People can feel when you don't genuinely care about them. And they can tell when you're just pushing to meet quotas. You're in the people business, not just the car business. When you make people feel valued, they come back. They trust you." Rick let out a long breath, clearly relieved to finally express his frustration. "I want to do better. I want to be part of the change, but I'm not sure where to start. I've been in this role for so long. I'm not sure I even remember what it's like to lead with heart." Dwayne smiled, his eyes softening. "It's never too late to learn, and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help guide you. Let's start by focusing on what really matters, treating people like they're more than just customers. They're human beings with lives, stories, and dreams. And it's your job to listen to those stories." Rick looked at Dwayne, his face lighting up with a mix of surprise and newfound hope. "You really mean that?" "Of course," Dwayne replied, his voice steady. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in the potential of this place, and in you. But it's not going to happen with the old ways of doing things. It's going to take time, patience, and a shift in how we all see the job. You ready for that?" Rick nodded, the weight of the conversation sinking in. "Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do this." Over the next few weeks, Dwayne began implementing changes. He started with small, simple things, creating a more welcoming atmosphere for customers, encouraging the staff to engage in friendly conversations, and most importantly, fostering an environment of mutual respect. He scheduled regular staff meetings to discuss ways they could improve, emphasizing the importance of communication, teamwork, and empathy. Rick, who had once been reluctant to open up, slowly started coming around. He began to adopt Dwayne's vision, but it wasn't without challenges. Some of the older salespeople were resistant to the changes, unwilling to let go of their outdated methods. They had seen success with the old way of doing things, and they weren't sure they were ready for the upheaval. One afternoon, Dwayne held a meeting with the entire team to address the growing tension. He knew it was now or never. "Listen, I get it," Dwayne said, standing in front of the group. "Change is hard. But if we want to be better, if we want to do right by our customers, we need to evolve. We need to stop thinking of this as just a place to sell cars and start thinking of it as a place to build relationships. When we treat people well, they'll keep coming back. Trust me. I've seen it happen time and time again." The room fell silent as everyone took in his words. Dwayne had that effect on people. He spoke with conviction and authority, but also with the kind of genuine kindness that made others believe in him. "Rick, I'm asking you to lead this team with heart," Dwayne continued, looking directly at the manager. "And I'm asking everyone here to do the same. Together, we can create something special, but we can't do it unless we're all in." Rick stood up, a determined look on his face. "You heard him. Let's make this work. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm ready to fix them. Let's lead with respect. Let's lead with care." The other salespeople exchanged glances, some nodding, others still hesitant. But slowly, the walls began to come down. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. That night, after the meeting, Dwayne took a walk around the dealership again. He looked at the cars on the lot, but this time, his mind wasn't just on the vehicles. He thought about the people who would walk through those doors tomorrow. The customers, the families, the individuals with their own dreams and stories. And for the first time in a long time, Dwayne felt like he was on the right path. Not just as a businessman, but as someone who could make a real difference. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that true success didn't come from the cars you sold, but from the relationships you built along the way. And as he stepped forward, he knew that change was already happening. Not just for the dealership, but for the people who worked there and the customers who walked through the doors. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be worth it. The first few weeks of change were anything but easy. Dwayne had set high expectations, and while there was palpable enthusiasm, the transformation was slow. Some people embraced the shift with open arms, eager to bring a new energy to the dealership. Others, however, clung to their old habits, skeptical that things could really improve with just a few motivational speeches and pep talks. Rick had been a big part of the change. He was learning to listen more, offering a hand to his team and customers instead of simply barking orders. He had started taking Dwayne's advice to heart, learning how to engage with people on a deeper level. But there were still moments when he faltered, when his old instincts kicked in, especially when the pressure mounted. Dwayne had come to realize that leadership wasn't just about setting the right example. It was also about offering guidance when things got tough. He could already see that Rick was improving, but there was a deeper layer of transformation that still needed to happen. Rick had spent years in an environment where competition and sales quotas were everything. Now, he had to learn to focus on people, on trust, on long-term success. One particularly busy Saturday afternoon, Dwayne arrived at the dealership to find Rick pacing behind the counter. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced with a tense, frustrated energy. "Rick, what's going on?" Dwayne asked, stepping into the room and glancing around. The showroom was filled with customers, and the salespeople seemed to be doing their best to juggle multiple conversations. Rick looked up, a little startled to see Dwayne, but then quickly straightened himself up. "It's just one of those days, you know? We've got a lot of customers, and it feels like nothing's going right. A few of the salespeople are struggling, and I just don't know how to fix it. I don't want to fall back into old patterns." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "What old patterns?" Rick hesitated, then admitted, "I don't want to start pushing people into sales they don't need just to make a quick buck. But I also don't want to lose out on opportunities. I feel like I'm stuck between wanting to do right by the customers and keeping the business afloat." Dwayne could sense Rick's internal struggle. It was the same battle he'd faced himself early in his career. The pressure to succeed can sometimes cloud your judgment, make you forget why you're doing what you're doing in the first place. He put a hand on Rick's shoulder. "I get it, but we're not in this to just make money. We're here to build trust with people. We're here to help them find what they need, not what's easiest for us to sell. The money will follow if we do it right." Rick nodded, his eyes shifting to the busy showroom. "But what about the team? How do we keep them motivated without falling into the same trap?" Dwayne paused, thinking for a moment. "You keep them focused on the big picture. Help them see that their success is tied to the success of the dealership as a whole. When they know the purpose behind the work, they'll go the extra mile. But if they feel like they're just selling cars for the sake of selling cars, that's when things fall apart." Rick took a deep breath and gave a slow nod. "I'll talk to them. We're a team, right? We need to start acting like it." Dwayne smiled, the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. "Exactly. Lead with integrity, and the rest will follow." Over the next few months, the dealership began to take on a new energy. It wasn't perfect. There were still tough days, still moments when old habits crept in, but slowly, things were changing for the better. Rick was learning to be more open with his team, offering encouragement and support instead of relying on harsh criticism. The salespeople, though skeptical at first, began to see the benefits of treating customers with respect and honesty. Word spread quickly in the community that this dealership was different. Dwayne wasn't around as often anymore. He had given Rick the space to lead, trusting that he would rise to the challenge. But every once in a while, Dwayne would show up unannounced, just to check in, to see how things were going. And every time, he was impressed by the progress. One afternoon, about 6 months after Dwayne had purchased the dealership, he walked into the showroom to see Rick greeting a customer with genuine enthusiasm. Dwayne paused for a moment, watching the interaction from a distance. Rick wasn't just selling a car. He was building a connection. He was talking to the customer about their life, their needs, and what kind of car would make their daily commute more enjoyable. Dwayne felt a sense of pride wash over him. This was the transformation he had envisioned. It wasn't just about the cars. They were a product of the real work that had been done here. The human connections, the respect, and the trust. Rick caught sight of Dwayne and smiled, walking over to him. "We just closed a deal with that couple," Rick said, gesturing toward the customer who was now signing paperwork. "I think they're going to love the car. And you know what? I think they really enjoyed the experience, too." Dwayne smiled back. "That's what it's all about, Rick. Making people feel good about their purchase, not just the car but the whole experience. I'm proud of you." Rick's eyes softened with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me a better way to lead, and it's making all the difference." Dwayne gave him a small nod. "You did the work, Rick. You turned it around. I'm just here to support you." As the two of them stood there, watching the customers walk out with their new cars, Dwayne felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. The dealership wasn't just a business anymore. It had become a place where people truly mattered. Customers came in expecting a transaction, but they left with more than just a car. They left with a positive experience, one that would keep them coming back for years to come. Dwayne's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't rush to answer it. He just stood there, soaking in the moment. The team had come a long way, and so had he. From that moment of being dismissed by Rick to this, watching him thrive, it was clear that everything had come full circle. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that change was always possible. The road to success wasn't always smooth, but if you kept pushing forward, stayed true to your values, and led with integrity, the results would come. And as he watched Rick greet the next customer, Dwayne knew that he had done more than just buy a dealership. He had made a lasting impact, one that would ripple through the lives of everyone who stepped foot in that showroom. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Dwayne felt like he had found exactly where he needed to be. The dealership had begun to thrive in ways Dwayne hadn't fully anticipated. Sales were up, but it wasn't just about the numbers. The team was more cohesive, the energy was positive, and customers were returning, not just for the cars, but for the experience. It was clear that the shift from simply being a transactional business to one built on relationships had made all the difference. Rick had become more than just the manager. He had become a leader, not only guiding his team but inspiring them. He was engaging with customers on a personal level, listening to their needs, and creating an atmosphere where they felt valued, not just like another sale. Dwayne had watched him grow, step by step, into a new version of himself, a version that understood the value of patience, empathy, and authentic leadership. But as the dealership continued to flourish, Dwayne knew that the true test of its success wouldn't be whether the sales numbers kept climbing. It would be whether they could maintain this momentum, keep growing, and continue to prioritize the relationships that had been at the heart of the transformation. One late afternoon, Dwayne sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports when Rick knocked lightly on the door and stepped in, looking a little more serious than usual. "Got a minute?" Rick asked, closing the door behind him. "Of course. What's up?" Dwayne replied, setting aside the paperwork and giving Rick his full attention. "I've been thinking a lot about where we are and where we're going," Rick began, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "The dealership's doing well. I mean, really well. But there's something I'm concerned about. Some of the newer staff members, they're still struggling to really connect with customers the way we've been teaching. It's like they get the basics, but they're not fully embracing the philosophy behind it." Dwayne leaned back in his chair, considering Rick's words. "You think they're not invested in the culture we're building?" Rick nodded. "It's not that they don't try, but it's like they're just going through the motions. They hit the numbers, but I don't see the same passion we've built with the rest of the team." Dwayne was quiet for a moment. It was a common challenge when implementing change, especially when it came to shifting mindsets. Not everyone would jump on board right away, and some might never fully embrace the vision. But Rick was right. If they didn't figure out how to get everyone aligned, the culture they had worked so hard to create could slowly start to fade. Well, it sounds like we need to double down on the training. More hands-on mentoring. If we want this to be more than just a transactional place, everyone has to live and breathe that philosophy, Dwayne said, his tone thoughtful. We can't just tell people how to treat customers. We have to show them, constantly. Make it part of everything we do. Rick's expression softened. Yeah, I think you're right. It's like we've created this amazing environment, but not everyone has fully realized how special it really is. They think it's just another dealership with a few nicer touches. Dwayne stood up, crossing the room to the large window that overlooked the dealership lot. It's about more than just the cars. It's about creating an experience that leaves a mark on people. We want them to feel something when they leave, not just a sense of accomplishment on our part, but a feeling of connection. And that's something you can't just teach with a checklist. It's about fostering real relationships with people. Rick took a deep breath, nodding. I get it. So, what do you think we should do next? Dwayne smiled, turning away from the window to face Rick. Let's start by leading more intentionally. I think it's time for all of us, especially the newer staff, to go out and really engage with the community. We've done a great job inside these walls, but we need to take our message beyond this dealership. When people see us as real, caring individuals, people they can trust, it'll stick. Rick raised an eyebrow. What do you mean by engage with the community? Simple. Events, sponsorships, charity drives. We can partner with local businesses, host events where people can come in, ask questions, and get to know us, not just as car salespeople, but as real members of this community. We'll build trust in a way that goes beyond the showroom floor. Rick's face lit up. That's brilliant. It's about showing the community that we're not just here to make money off them. We're here to be a part of their lives, help out where we can. Exactly, Dwayne agreed. And we'll have the whole team involved. Everyone, from the salespeople to the service technicians, needs to understand that our mission is bigger than just the cars. If we want this to last, we need to establish ourselves as part of the fabric of the community. Rick chuckled, a spark of excitement in his eyes. All right then, I'm on board. Let's do this. Over the next few months, the dealership rolled out a series of community initiatives. They began sponsoring local events, hosting car clinics for families, and offering free vehicle checkups for teachers and first responders. They even organized a charity event to benefit a local shelter, where a percentage of every sale that month went directly to helping those in need. The results were almost immediate. Not only did it strengthen relationships with current customers, but it also attracted a whole new group of people who appreciated the dealership's commitment to something larger than just selling cars. Dwayne watched as the sales team flourished, not because of the pressure to hit numbers, but because they genuinely cared about the people they were serving. Rick found a renewed sense of purpose in leading his team. He started mentoring the newer staff more intentionally, taking them out on customer visits, showing them how to build relationships beyond the sale. Slowly, the culture Dwayne had envisioned became more than just a philosophy. It became a way of life. One Saturday afternoon, after a successful charity event, Dwayne stood outside the dealership, watching as Rick shared a laugh with a customer who was picking up their new car. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. Rick had come a long way from the skeptical manager who had once brushed off customers. Now, he was leading a team that understood the importance of connection and service. And as for Dwayne, he couldn't have been prouder of how far they had come together. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that true leadership was about more than just managing. It was about inspiring and helping others grow. And as he watched Rick and the rest of the team thrive, he knew that the impact they had made went beyond the cars they sold. It was the relationships they had built and the trust they had earned that would carry them through whatever came next. The dealership wasn't just a business anymore. It had become a cornerstone of the community, a place where people felt welcome, understood, and valued. And as Dwayne looked ahead, he knew that the best was yet to come. As the dealership continued to flourish, Dwayne couldn't help but notice that things were starting to feel almost too good to be true. The sales were steady, the community outreach programs were gaining traction, and customer satisfaction was through the roof. The entire team was aligned with the new vision, and the culture that had once been a dream was now fully ingrained in the daily operations. But with success came new challenges. Competition in the auto industry was always fierce, and Dwayne knew it wouldn't be long before others started noticing the changes at his dealership. It wasn't just about making the sale anymore. It was about maintaining the integrity of what they had built. The trust they'd earned from the community and customers was fragile, and all it would take was one slip-up to undo everything. One morning, Dwayne sat in his office, reviewing the latest market trends. He knew that they couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. They had to keep innovating, keep improving, or risk becoming complacent. Just as he was lost in thought, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Rick. "We need to talk. Urgently." Dwayne's heart skipped a beat. Rick's usually calm demeanor was now tinged with urgency. Without wasting another second, Dwayne grabbed his jacket and headed for the showroom floor. When he arrived, he found Rick standing with a few of the senior salespeople in a tight circle. The look on Rick's face made Dwayne's stomach drop. "What's going on?" Dwayne asked, walking over. Rick motioned for him to follow him into his office. Once inside, Rick shut the door behind them and leaned against it. "We've got a problem, Dwayne," he said, his voice tense. Dwayne's eyes narrowed. "What kind of problem?" "Remember the car we sold to the Winters family last week?" Rick asked, referring to a couple who had been thrilled with the car-buying experience. "Well, they're back, and they're not happy." Dwayne's brows furrowed. "What happened?" Rick hesitated before answering, the weight of the situation evident on his face. "They claim the car was sold to them with some serious issues, stuff that should have been caught during the inspection. The check engine light came on just a few days after they bought it, and now they're demanding a refund." Dwayne's mind raced. This wasn't just an isolated issue. It could tarnish the reputation they had worked so hard to build. "Did we make a mistake on the inspection?" he asked, trying to process the details. Rick shook his head. "No, not really. The car passed all of our standard checks. But it seems like there was a deeper issue that wasn't obvious during the routine inspection. It's not major, but it's enough for them to feel like we misled them." Dwayne sighed and ran a hand through his hair. This was the exact kind of situation he'd feared. A mistake like this, even if unintentional, could set the dealership back. "What are we doing to fix it?" Rick shifted uncomfortably. "Well, that's the thing. I'm not sure. We've offered them a full inspection again, and we're willing to take care of the repair costs. But they're not having it. They're demanding a refund. And, frankly, they're threatening to go public with it. Social media, reviews, the whole thing. They're telling their friends, and word's starting to spread." Dwayne exhaled slowly, weighing the options in his mind. The Winters family was angry, and it was clear that no matter how much they tried to fix the issue, the trust had already been shaken. But Dwayne couldn't let this situation spiral. This was a test, not just of the dealership's ability to fix the issue, but of their commitment to transparency, honesty, and putting the customer first. "Okay," Dwayne said, his voice steady. "First things first. We handle this professionally. We make sure the Winters family knows we're not going to run from this. We'll fix their car, no questions asked, and we'll throw in a complimentary extended warranty. But that's not the most important thing right now." Rick looked at him, confused. "It's not?" "No," Dwayne replied. "What's most important right now is how we make them feel. They came to us for a solution, not for an argument. We need to make them feel heard. And I want you to personally go to their house, apologize in person, and make things right." Rick blinked, clearly taken aback by Dwayne's suggestion. "You want me to go to their house?" Dwayne nodded. "Yes. This isn't just a business transaction anymore. This is about rebuilding trust. The only way we do that is by showing them we care, and that we're willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. You go, and you listen to them. No excuses, no blame." Rick looked at Dwayne for a moment, the weight of the situation still heavy in the air. Finally, he nodded. "I'll go. I'll take care of it." Dwayne gave him a firm pat on the shoulder. "Good. Let's not just fix the car. Let's fix the relationship. That's what this dealership is about." Later that evening, Dwayne found himself pacing the dealership, his mind still on the Winters family. The situation felt delicate, and he knew that the outcome would shape how the community viewed them moving forward. They couldn't afford to lose the trust they'd worked so hard to earn. Around 9 p.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from Rick. "Just got back. I'm sorry, Dwayne, but they're not happy. They were still upset about the issue, and I couldn't change their mind. They're still threatening to post bad reviews." Dwayne read the message twice, trying to digest it. He felt a sinking feeling in his stomach, but he also knew that this wasn't the end of the story. The true test was how they handled the fallout. After a moment, Dwayne typed a response. "Don't worry, Rick. This isn't over. We'll keep doing the right thing, and we'll make it right with them. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't always lead to immediate results, but it builds long-term trust. We'll turn this around." Rick's response was almost immediate. "I hope so. I'm just frustrated. I really thought we could fix it." "We will. We always do. Let's keep our heads up and focus on the bigger picture." Dwayne set his phone down, still deep in thought. This was a critical moment, not just for the dealership, but for the values they stood for. It was time to prove that integrity, transparency, and care weren't just empty words. They were the foundation of everything they did. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that real leadership came from adversity. When things got tough, that's when you saw who you truly were. And as he looked toward the future, he knew that no matter how challenging things became, the commitment to his team, his customers, and the values they stood for would always be the driving force. Trust wasn't built in a moment. It was built over time, through action, transparency, and a relentless pursuit of doing what was right. And Dwayne was determined to prove that they had what it took to weather any storm. The situation with the Winters family wasn't resolved as quickly as Dwayne had hoped. Despite Rick's best efforts, their frustration lingered, and the threat of negative reviews loomed large over the dealership. For the first time in months, Dwayne felt the weight of uncertainty press down on him. It was clear that they weren't just facing a mechanical issue. They were facing a test of character. The reputation they had built over the past year was on the line. Rick had done everything he could, from offering additional repairs to providing a complimentary extended warranty, but the Winters family wasn't satisfied. They wanted a refund, plain and simple, and they made it clear that they would not be backing down without it. The clock was ticking, and Dwayne knew that they couldn't afford to let this drag on any longer. One morning, as he walked into the dealership, Dwayne was met by a wave of tension. The staff was on edge, and Rick's usual calm was replaced by a look of concern. It was obvious that the situation had been weighing on him as well. "Morning, Rick," Dwayne said, trying to keep his voice light. "How's everything going?" Rick ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "We got another email from the Winters family. They're still not happy, and now they're threatening to go public. They're talking about posting all over social media. I don't know what else we can do." Dwayne nodded, his mind working through the options. He couldn't ignore this. He had to address it head-on, not only for the Winters family but for the entire dealership. The last thing they needed was for this issue to escalate beyond control. "Well, we need to think about what we can do to solve this. And we need to do it quickly. We don't just want to fix the car. We need to fix the relationship," Dwayne said, his voice firm. "We've always been about transparency and doing right by people. Let's put that to the test." Rick raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Let's invite the Winters family in for a face-to-face conversation," Dwayne proposed. "But this time, we don't just address the problem. We also show them how we're going to prevent this from happening again. Transparency goes both ways. We need to tell them everything, how the issue slipped through, what we're doing to correct it, and why we're committed to making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Rick seemed to hesitate. "Do you really think they'll go for that? They're pretty upset." Dwayne placed a hand on Rick's shoulder. "I know it won't be easy, but this is the right thing to do. It's not about fixing the sale. It's about fixing the trust. If we don't do this, we risk losing more than just one customer. We risk losing the community's trust." Rick let out a breath and nodded slowly. "All right, let's give it a shot. But I'm not sure they'll take it well." Dwayne smiled slightly, trying to ease Rick's worry. Sometimes doing the right thing means facing the toughest situations. but it's the only way we'll come out of this stronger. Later that afternoon, the Winters family arrived at the dealership. Dwayne could see the tension in their faces as they walked through the door, their arms crossed and their expressions hard. The couple had every right to be upset, but Dwayne wasn't going to let this encounter devolve into a confrontation. He had a plan, and he knew that it would take more than just words to repair the damage. "Mr. and Mrs. Winters, thank you for coming in," Dwayne said, his tone warm but professional. "I'm Dwayne Johnson, and I understand that you've been dealing with some issues with your recent purchase. I want to assure you that we're here to make things right." Mr. Winters gave a curt nod, while Mrs. Winters looked around, clearly skeptical. "I don't think there's anything you can say that's going to fix this," she said, her voice sharp. "You sold us a car with known issues, and now we're stuck with it." Dwayne remained calm. "I hear you, and I'm not here to make excuses. I want to be completely transparent with you. Our inspection process failed to catch a deeper issue with the vehicle. It was an oversight, and that's on us." Mr. Winters frowned. "So, you're admitting that you sold us a defective car?" "Yes, we are," Dwayne said, his voice unwavering. "And while the issue isn't major, we should have caught it during the inspection. We should have been more thorough. I take full responsibility for that." Mrs. Winters shook her head. "That doesn't make it right. We're still out a significant amount of money, and now we have to deal with the hassle of repairs. How do we know this won't happen again?" Dwayne nodded, acknowledging their frustration. "I understand your concerns, and I want you to know that we're not just fixing your car. We're making changes to ensure this doesn't happen again. We're revising our inspection process, implementing additional checks, and providing more extensive training for our team. We're committed to ensuring this never happens again, to you or anyone else." Rick stepped forward, his voice gentle but earnest. "We've learned from this, and we're dedicated to making things right. We're offering to repair the vehicle at no cost to you, and we'll provide you with a complimentary extended warranty. If you're still not satisfied, we'll explore other options. We want to make sure you're happy with your purchase." There was a long pause as the Winters family exchanged glances. Dwayne could see that they were still upset, but the defensiveness in their expressions had softened. They weren't ready to forgive and forget, but at least they were listening. Finally, Mrs. Winters spoke, her tone quieter now. "I appreciate you being upfront with us. I'm not sure it fixes everything, but it's a start." Dwayne nodded, grateful for the opening. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to forget what happened. What I'm asking is for the chance to earn back your trust. We value our relationship with our customers, and we want you to feel confident in us." After a few more moments of quiet exchange, Mr. Winters gave a reluctant nod. "All right, we'll give you a chance to fix it, but if this happens again, it'll be the last time." Dwayne extended his hand with a smile. "I promise you it won't happen again, and I truly appreciate your willingness to work with us." As the Winters family left the dealership, Dwayne let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the situation begin to lift. It wasn't over yet, but they had taken a huge step forward. By being transparent and honest, they had shown the Winters family that they were committed to more than just making a sale. They were committed to doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. As Rick and Dwayne watched the Winters family drive off, Rick turned to Dwayne with a look of quiet respect. "I didn't think it would go that well," he admitted. Dwayne smiled. "That's the power of transparency. When people see that you're being honest and genuinely care about making things right, it goes a long way." Rick looked thoughtful. "Yeah, I guess sometimes doing the right thing isn't the easy thing." Dwayne's smile deepened. "Exactly. But in the end, it's always worth it. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" For Dwayne, it was the belief that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, was always the path forward. In the end, trust was the most important currency. And as long as he and his team continued to prioritize honesty and integrity, they could weather any storm. Trust wasn't built overnight, but with each honest step, they were getting closer to creating something truly lasting. The resolution with the Winters family was a turning point for the dealership. Although the issue hadn't been fully erased from the minds of the Winters, Dwayne was confident that their commitment to transparency had helped start the healing process. As the days passed, the ripple effect of their actions began to manifest in ways they hadn't anticipated. first, the social media buzz around the incident died down. The Winters family, despite their initial anger, had chosen to remain quiet on the issue after their conversation with Dwayne. There was no public post, no scathing review to be found. Their decision to stay silent, for better or worse, was a tacit acknowledgement that Dwayne and the dealership had at least made an effort to do right by them. That was something. But the true test came in the form of a local news outlet. A reporter had caught wind of the Winters incident and reached out to Dwayne for a statement. At first, Dwayne had been apprehensive. The media could be a double-edged sword. It could either validate the dealership's actions or cast them in a negative light. But he also realized that this was an opportunity to further reinforce their message of transparency and to show that they were doing things differently than other businesses. After a quick huddle with his management team, Dwayne agreed to the interview. The reporter, Jessica Williams, arrived at the dealership just after lunch. She was sharp and to the point, her camera crew in tow. They set up in one of the back offices, away from the bustle of the showroom. Dwayne greeted her with a handshake and a warm smile, trying to appear confident, despite the growing nerves in his stomach. Jessica wasted no time. "So, Mr. Johnson, the Winters family had a negative experience with your dealership. They claim you sold them a car with issues that should have been caught during the inspection. How do you respond to those claims?" Dwayne leaned forward slightly, choosing his words carefully. "Well, Jessica, I'd like to start by saying that we fully acknowledge the mistake. Our inspection process didn't catch an issue that should have been identified, and we take full responsibility for that. It wasn't our intention to mislead anyone, but the fact is, it slipped through the cracks." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "So, you're admitting that you sold them a defective car?" "Yes," Dwayne replied, his voice steady. "We did. And that's why we've been working closely with them to resolve the issue. We offered them a full repair at no cost, and we've also taken steps to improve our inspection process moving forward." Jessica seemed to soften slightly. "I'm hearing that you've taken responsibility for the issue. But what about the larger picture? What steps are you taking to ensure that this doesn't happen again, not just with the Winters family, but with any future customers?" Dwayne smiled, appreciating the question. "That's a great question. It's not just about fixing the car, it's about fixing the process. We've already implemented additional checks and balances in our inspection system. We're bringing in experts to train our team on spotting potential issues before they reach the customer. And we're making sure our customers know that we're here for them, not just at the point of sale, but for the long haul." Jessica nodded, jotting down notes. "So, you're making these changes proactively?" "Absolutely," Dwayne said. "We've learned from this situation, and we're committed to making our dealership a place where people can trust that they're getting the best service possible. Our goal is to build relationships with our customers, not just make a sale. And that means being transparent and accountable, even when things don't go as planned." The interview continued for another 10 minutes, with Jessica asking more questions about the dealership's core values, its community initiatives, and Dwayne's personal philosophy on leadership. By the time the cameras were turned off and the crew packed up, Dwayne felt a sense of calm. He had answered everything honestly, without hesitation, and he had given the dealership an opportunity to show its true character. Later that afternoon, Dwayne sat in his office, reflecting on the interview. He had done his best to be open and forthright, but now he had to wait for the fallout. The media could be unpredictable. Would they focus on the positive steps they were taking to make things right? Or would the focus remain on the mistake they'd made? A few hours passed, and Dwayne's phone buzzed. It was an email notification from the local news outlet. "Breaking news. Car dealership takes responsibility for customer concerns, pledges transparency." With a deep breath, Dwayne opened the email and clicked the link to the story. His heart raced as he read the headline. The article was surprisingly fair, and the tone was balanced. Jessica had highlighted the dealership's commitment to transparency and the changes they were implementing to prevent future issues. There was a brief mention of the Winters family's complaint, but the focus remained on how Dwayne's team was working to make things right. The closing paragraph struck a chord with Dwayne. In a time when many businesses hide behind their reputations, Johnson Motors is taking a different approach. By acknowledging their mistakes and making proactive changes, they are not only repairing a relationship with one customer, they are setting a new standard for how businesses should handle mistakes. It's a bold move, but one that may just pay off in the long run. Dwayne sat back in his chair, a wave of relief washing over him. The media had given them a fair shake, and more importantly, the message was out there. They weren't running from their mistakes. They were embracing them and working to do better. The next day, as Dwayne walked into the dealership, there was a palpable change in the air. The employees were more energized, more optimistic. Even Rick, who had been uneasy the day before, seemed to have a renewed sense of purpose. "Good morning, Dwayne," Rick greeted him, a grin spreading across his face. "I think we've turned a corner here. The feedback from the community is overwhelmingly positive. I saw a few comments online praising how you handled the interview. People are starting to notice." Dwayne smiled. "That's great to hear. We've got a long way to go, but this is a step in the right direction. We've shown them we're serious about making things right." As the day went on, Dwayne watched his team with a sense of pride. They were more engaged, more focused. They had passed the test of trust, and now it was time to build on that foundation. Later that week, a customer came into the dealership, a woman named Sarah, who had heard about the interview and wanted to see the changes for herself. She'd been a loyal customer of the dealership for years, but had grown disillusioned with the industry as a whole. "I wasn't sure what to expect when I heard about what happened with the Winters family," Sarah said, looking Dwayne in the eye. "But after hearing you talk about it, I'm willing to give you a second chance. I think that's something worth supporting." Dwayne smiled, grateful for her faith. "Thank you, Sarah. We're going to prove that your trust in us was well placed." What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that every challenge presented an opportunity. The issue with the Winters family had been tough, but it had forced him and his team to confront their flaws head-on. By embracing transparency, taking responsibility, and making proactive changes, they had not only repaired the relationship with one customer, they had set themselves on a path toward building a stronger, more trustworthy business. And as he watched the dealership come alive with energy and optimism, Dwayne knew that their journey was just beginning. After the local news interview, business at Johnson Motors had taken an unexpected, but welcome turn. Customer foot traffic had increased, largely due to the positive press coverage, and word of mouth about the dealership's transparency had begun to spread through the community. Dwayne could feel the shift. People were starting to believe in the vision he had for the dealership. They weren't just buying cars, they were buying into a promise of integrity and trust. But with the increased attention, Dwayne knew they were walking a fine line. He had won back some trust, but there was still much more to prove. The stakes had been raised, and the next few weeks would be critical in determining whether this newfound goodwill would stick or fade away. It was Friday afternoon when Dwayne felt the weight of that challenge more than ever. He had just finished a meeting with his management team when Rick stopped him as he was walking out of the conference room. "Dwayne, we've got a situation," Rick said, his voice low but urgent. Dwayne paused, raising an eyebrow. "What happened?" Rick glanced around quickly, making sure no one else was within earshot. "It's about Sarah Dawson, the loyal customer who came in last week. She's had some issues with her new car. A minor problem, but she's not happy. And now, she's not alone." Dwayne felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" Rick took a deep breath. "She's telling everyone she knows about the issue, and now we've got a few other customers who are coming forward with similar complaints. Nothing major, but it's enough to start a ripple effect. People are starting to question whether we've truly learned from our mistakes, or if it's just talk." Dwayne rubbed his forehead, trying to process the information. After everything they'd been through with the Winters family, he had hoped this wouldn't happen again. But now, it seemed like their foundation was being tested. "What kind of issues are we talking about?" Dwayne asked. "It's mostly minor mechanical stuff. Nothing that should have slipped through our checks, but enough to make them feel like they can't trust us fully," Rick replied. "They're worried that maybe this is just the beginning, that we're still cutting corners." Dwayne's stomach tightened. He had worked so hard to repair the damage done by the Winters situation, and now it seemed like a new challenge was on the horizon. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "We can't let this spiral, Rick. We need to act fast." The first step was reaching out to Sarah Dawson directly. Dwayne knew that, as a loyal customer, she deserved the attention. And this was the perfect opportunity to prove that they had learned from their past mistakes. The following Monday, Sarah arrived at the dealership with her car in tow, visibly frustrated but willing to talk. She didn't want to make a scene. She just wanted answers. "Dwayne, I didn't want to be the one to bring this up," Sarah began, crossing her arms. "But I've had some issues with the car I bought a couple of months ago. It's nothing major, just a faulty brake light and a small issue with the air conditioning. But it's frustrating, and I'm hearing from a few others who are having similar problems. I thought this was behind us after what happened with the Winters family." Dwayne nodded sympathetically, giving her a genuine look of concern. "Sarah, I'm really sorry to hear this, and I want you to know that we take this seriously. We've worked hard to earn your trust, and the last thing we want is for you to feel like we're cutting corners." Sarah softened slightly, but her frustration still lingered. "I just don't want to go through what I went through with other dealerships. I was really hoping things would be different here." "I understand," Dwayne replied, meeting her gaze. "And I want to assure you that we're not going to sweep this under the rug. We'll take care of your car, no questions asked. But more than that, we're going to take a close look at everything going on and make sure we address any underlying issues. We don't just want to fix your car, we want to fix the process." Rick, who had been listening quietly from the background, stepped forward. "We'll personally take care of the inspection and make sure there's no issue left unaddressed. And if you're not satisfied, we'll work with you until you are." Dwayne turned to Sarah. "We want to make sure you feel valued, not just as a customer, but as part of our community. We're not perfect, but we're committed to doing better every day." Sarah sighed, but her posture softened. "All right, Dwayne, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I appreciate how you're handling this. Just, please, make sure it's taken care of." The team immediately got to work on Sarah's car, thoroughly inspecting it and making sure that every detail was attended to. The issues were minor, but it didn't matter. Dwayne wasn't about to let this situation turn into something bigger. They had to get it right, and fast. As the day went on, Dwayne and Rick met with the other customers who had voiced similar concerns. They treated each one with the same level of care and attention, ensuring that every complaint was resolved. There was no stone left unturned, no excuse for anything less than perfection. By the end of the day, Dwayne felt exhausted but hopeful. The dealership had handled the situation with transparency, again, just as they had promised. The next morning, Sarah returned to the dealership. She was quieter than usual, but had a look of appreciation on her face. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah told Dwayne as she walked in, "and I want to thank you. My car's been fixed, and I haven't had any further issues since. I know you're doing everything you can to make sure these problems don't happen again. I just wanted to say, I'm sticking with you." Dwayne smiled, his heart lifting. "Thank you, Sarah. That means the world to us. We'll keep working to earn your trust every day." "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" For Dwayne, it was the understanding that loyalty was earned, not just with grand gestures, but with the everyday actions that showed people you cared. He knew there would always be challenges, but the commitment to doing right by his customers would continue to drive him forward. The test of loyalty, after all, wasn't just about handling the good times. It was about showing up when things got difficult and proving that their word was something people could rely on. As Dwayne watched Sarah leave the dealership with a smile on her face, he knew that Johnson Motors had passed yet another test. One customer at a time, they were building something stronger than just a business. They were building a community, and that was something that no mistake could tear down. The feeling of success and renewed trust from customers like Sarah was a relief to Dwayne and his team. Business seemed to be flourishing again, and it appeared that the dealership was on the path to recovery after the initial setbacks. But as the days went by, Dwayne began to sense something else lingering in the background, a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Despite all the progress they had made, one nagging thought kept him up at night. How long could they keep this momentum going? The dealership had made significant strides in repairing its reputation, but Dwayne knew all too well how fragile success could be. One misstep, one mistake, and it could all unravel. That's why he decided it was time to check in with his team, especially Rick, to make sure they were all still aligned with the same vision. One afternoon, Dwayne invited Rick to his office for a private conversation. He knew that Rick had been putting in extra hours, managing the day-to-day operations and handling customer concerns, so it was important to take a moment to assess the bigger picture. Rick, how are things really going? Dwayne asked, leaning back in his chair. I know we've had some success recently, but I can't shake the feeling that something's off. Rick hesitated for a moment before responding. You're not wrong, Dwayne. Things have been good, but there's something I need to bring up. Dwayne sat up, his eyes narrowing. What is it? Rick sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. I've been hearing some murmurs around the dealership. Nothing direct, but there's been talk that some employees are starting to feel uncomfortable. They're questioning the direction we're heading. There's a feeling of unease, like they're not sure if we're truly turning a corner or just putting on a show. Dwayne blinked, momentarily stunned. Are you saying that some of our own people aren't fully bought in? Rick nodded. It's subtle, but it's there. Some of the newer hires are having trouble adjusting to the changes in our process, and the more seasoned employees are starting to feel like the old ways aren't being fully acknowledged. They're afraid of losing the dealership's original identity. It's been a lot of change, and not everyone is ready for it. Dwayne leaned forward, processing the information. He had worked tirelessly to reshape the dealership and restore its integrity, but he hadn't anticipated how difficult the shift might be for the employees, many of whom had been accustomed to the old business model. Do you think this is something we can fix? Dwayne asked. I do, Rick said, his voice firm. But it's going to take more than just a few changes on the surface. We need to make sure everyone understands why we're doing this. We need to communicate the why behind our actions and show them that it's not just about the bottom line. It's about building a long-lasting, reputable business. Dwayne nodded, deep in thought. You're right. We can't afford to have our own people doubting the vision. We've worked too hard to rebuild trust with our customers and our community. If we don't have the full support of our team, none of this will stick. The following week, Dwayne decided to take action. He scheduled a meeting with the entire staff. This wouldn't be a typical meeting. It would be a heart-to-heart discussion about the future of Johnson Motors, the values they were building, and the importance of collaboration. If he was going to unite the team, they needed to be on the same page. The meeting took place on a Thursday morning. Dwayne gathered everyone in the showroom, and Rick stood by his side. The room was filled with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. This was a pivotal moment. Dwayne took a deep breath before speaking. Good morning, everyone, he began, his voice steady but full of sincerity. I know the past few months have been a whirlwind. We've been through a lot of changes here at Johnson Motors. Some of them have been exciting, others have been challenging. But through it all, we've kept one thing in mind. We're building something better, something that lasts. The room fell silent as everyone listened intently. I know that some of you have questions. I know some of you are uncertain about the direction we're headed. That's okay. Change is never easy, especially when it feels like it's moving faster than we're ready for. But I want to be clear about why we're doing this. We're not just trying to fix what's broken. We're creating a new standard, one built on trust, transparency, and accountability. This isn't just about us as a business. It's about creating a culture where we all feel proud to come to work every day. He paused for a moment, making sure his words resonated. I can't do this alone, and none of us can do it without the full support of every person in this room. We are a team, and each one of you plays an integral part in making this vision a reality. If we're going to succeed, we have to do it together. Each and every one of us has to be committed to the same goal. The room remained quiet as Dwayne's words sank in. He could see the employees exchanging glances, some nodding slowly, others still looking uncertain. But Dwayne knew this was the first step in forging a stronger bond within the team. They needed to feel that they were a part of the vision, that they weren't just cogs in a machine but contributors to something bigger. Rick stepped forward. I've been with this company for a long time, and I've seen the highs and lows. But what Dwayne is talking about is something I believe in. We've got the opportunity to turn this place into something people can really depend on. But we can't do it without your help. Dwayne looked around the room, his eyes meeting those of each employee. This dealership is more than just a business to me. It's a legacy. It's about giving people the kind of service they can trust. It's about making sure that every person who walks through those doors knows they matter. But it all starts with us, right here, right now. I need your help to make this a place we can all be proud of. The room remained quiet for a few moments before someone in the back spoke up. It was one of the newer employees, a young woman named Lisa, who had been with the dealership for just a few months. "I'll be honest, Dwayne," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I wasn't sure at first if this was going to work. I wasn't sure if you really meant it when you said things were going to change. But now I see that you do. And I want to be a part of that." Dwayne smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Lisa. That's exactly what I needed to hear. We're in this together. And I promise, we'll make sure that every step forward is a step we take as a team." After the meeting, Dwayne could feel the energy shift in the dealership. It wasn't instant, but there was a noticeable change in how people interacted with each other. The doubts that had been lingering in the air seemed to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that the most difficult moments often held the greatest opportunities. Leading a business wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was about ensuring that everyone involved had a stake in the outcome. It was about forging a path forward together, no matter how uncertain the future might seem. And as he walked through the dealership, seeing his team more united than ever, Dwayne felt confident that they were ready for whatever challenge came next. The road ahead might still be tough, but they were in it together. And together, they would rise. Just when Dwayne thought the dealership was on the brink of smooth sailing, an unexpected phone call changed everything. It was a Wednesday morning when his phone buzzed on his desk. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it gave him an uneasy feeling. He picked up, hoping it was nothing more than another inquiry about a used car. "Hello, Dwayne Johnson speaking," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Johnson, this is Natalie Foster," the voice on the other end said, a tone of urgency in her voice. "I'm with the city's regulatory office, and we need to speak with you as soon as possible. It's regarding your dealership." Dwayne's stomach sank. It wasn't every day that someone from the regulatory office called, and the way she spoke made it sound like trouble was brewing. "What's this about?" Dwayne asked, trying to remain calm. "It's about an inspection that was conducted last week. Some of the paperwork isn't lining up, and we've received a few complaints. I'd like to meet in person to go over the details. Can you come to my office today?" Dwayne's heart raced. They had been doing everything by the book. Everything had been above board. Why was there suddenly a problem? "I'll be there at 2 p.m., Dwayne replied, not wanting to delay the inevitable. As the hours passed, Dwayne's mind raced. He tried to think of anything that could have gone wrong, but he couldn't find anything concrete. Johnson Motors had been transparent, had followed all the new procedures, and had worked tirelessly to rebuild its reputation. At 2 p.m., Dwayne arrived at the city's regulatory office. It was a nondescript building, the kind of place that didn't inspire much confidence in someone walking in, especially when they were unsure of what awaited them inside. He took a deep breath before stepping into the building and approaching the receptionist. "I'm here to meet Natalie Foster," he said, trying to keep his composure. A few minutes later, he was escorted into a small conference room where a woman in her mid-40s sat, waiting for him. Natalie Foster wasn't what Dwayne had expected. She was calm, composed, and didn't give off the usual sense of authority that someone from a regulatory office might. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming on such short notice," she said as she shook his hand. "Of course, Miss Foster. I'm eager to understand what's going on," Dwayne said, taking a seat across from her. Natalie flipped open a folder and laid some papers on the table. "We conducted a routine inspection of your dealership last week, and while the physical aspects of the dealership are in order, we've come across some discrepancies in your paperwork." Dwayne's pulse quickened. He'd been meticulous about documentation, and he couldn't recall anything that could be considered out of place. "What kind of discrepancies?" Dwayne asked, leaning forward slightly. "There are several customer contracts that have inconsistent pricing and terms," she said, glancing up at him over her glasses. "A few of your cars have discrepancies between their listed price and the final sale price. It doesn't seem intentional, but there are enough inconsistencies to raise concerns." Dwayne's mind raced. He had personally made sure all contracts and prices were transparent. This was the kind of thing that could undo all the work they'd put in. "Could you be more specific?" Dwayne asked, his voice tight. "Certainly," she said, flipping through more pages. "This one, for example, Sarah Dawson, the woman who came in last month, the one you worked with directly. According to her final contract, she was charged a different price than the one she was originally quoted. And there's another contract here for a customer named Tom Barrett. The price discrepancy is minor, but it still doesn't align with what was advertised on your website. Dwayne felt his stomach churn. He knew Sarah's case had been handled properly, and he could swear Tom Barrett had been given an accurate quote. How had these discrepancies happened? I don't understand, Dwayne said, shaking his head. We've been careful with pricing. Our contracts are supposed to be clear. We've even invested in training our team to ensure transparency with every customer. Natalie nodded, but her expression remained serious. That may be the case, Mr. Johnson, but something's not adding up. This isn't just about one or two discrepancies. There's a pattern here. I'm concerned that there might be issues deeper within your operations that you're unaware of. This could lead to a more serious investigation if it continues. Dwayne's chest tightened. This was the last thing he needed after everything they had worked to rebuild. What do you suggest we do? Dwayne asked, trying to regain some control over the situation. First, I need you to go through all your recent contracts, especially those from the past month, and provide an explanation for the discrepancies. If they can be explained, then this can be cleared up quickly. But if not, we may need to revisit your dealership's operation more thoroughly. Dwayne nodded, his mind already racing with possible solutions. I'll get on it right away. Good, Natalie said, standing up and offering him a hand. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, but I'll need your cooperation. I'll be expecting a full report by the end of the week. As Dwayne left the office, his mind was spinning. Discrepancies in contracts? This could be a huge setback, but he couldn't let it crush everything they had worked for. He knew the dealership had done everything in good faith, so the key now was to uncover the cause of these inconsistencies and fix them, no matter what. As he sat in his car, preparing to head back to Johnson Motors, Dwayne's phone rang again. It was Rick. Dwayne, we've got a situation. The city's regulatory office called. They're looking into the pricing discrepancies, Rick said, his voice tense. I know, Rick. I just came from their office, Dwayne replied, rubbing his temples. We need to get this fixed. I don't know what happened, but we're going to find out. I need everyone on this now. Later that afternoon, Dwayne gathered his management team to discuss the next steps. It was clear that these discrepancies had to be addressed immediately. The team was going to have to comb through every sale, every contract, and every transaction from the last month. We're not going to let this ruin us, Dwayne told them firmly. We've come too far. Whatever happened here, we'll fix it. We'll be transparent, and we'll prove to everyone that we're still the dealership they can trust. As the team got to work, Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an isolated issue. Someone, somewhere, had made a mistake. And if they didn't find the cause soon, it could destroy everything. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that challenges were opportunities in disguise. He knew this setback could be the test they needed to prove that their integrity wasn't just a marketing tactic. It was the foundation of everything they did. But he also knew that without total transparency, the future of Johnson Motors was in jeopardy. And so, as he stood in his office late that evening, looking out at the darkened showroom, Dwayne made a vow to himself. They would uncover the truth, no matter how hard it was. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. For the sake of his team, his customers, and the legacy they were building, they had to fix this, together. The following morning, Dwayne was up early, reviewing every contract in the dealership system. His mind buzzed with frustration as he scanned document after document, each one more perplexing than the last. The pricing discrepancies didn't seem like errors. They felt more like intentional deviations. But why? Who would risk sabotaging the dealership now, when they were so close to turning things around? By mid-morning, Dwayne had already met with Rick and a few of the other managers, assigning them the task of reviewing the most recent customer files. He couldn't afford any mistakes. They needed to pinpoint exactly where things went wrong and fast. As Dwayne sat in his office, the weight of the situation pressing down on him, his phone buzzed again. It was Rick. Dwayne, we found something, Rick said, his voice low but urgent. What is it? Dwayne replied, his heart rate quickening. It's not just a few pricing errors. We've gone through the contracts, and there's a pattern. Someone's been changing the prices after the contracts were signed. It's not a mistake, Dwayne. It's deliberate. Dwayne's pulse spiked. Are you saying someone inside the dealership is doing this? Rick hesitated before answering. It looks that way. We checked the timestamps, and the changes were made after the deals were closed, likely through the system's admin portal. The changes weren't visible to the customers at the time of sale. But now, with the paperwork being reviewed, it's showing up. Dwayne felt a knot tighten in his chest. The thought of someone in his own dealership intentionally altering contracts was a blow he hadn't seen coming. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Do we know who? Dwayne asked. Not yet. We're digging through the access logs now. Whoever it is, they've been careful, no obvious signs. But it's clear that someone's been tampering with the numbers. Dwayne felt a wave of anger rise within him, but he knew he had to keep a cool head. He couldn't let emotions cloud his judgment. This could be the breaking point for the dealership, and if he handled it wrong, it might tear everything apart. We need to find out who did this, Rick. Fast. If this is happening inside the dealership, we need to deal with it internally before it goes any further. By late afternoon, Rick and the team had managed to narrow it down to a few potential suspects. It wasn't clear yet who was responsible, but the team was zeroing in on the employees who had access to the system's admin portal. The team discovered that a junior sales manager named Kyle Thompson had been working closely with several of the affected customers. He had been with the dealership for over a year and had quickly earned a reputation for being eager and hardworking. But now, Dwayne wasn't so sure. His access logs showed multiple instances of him logging in after hours, making adjustments to several contracts. Dwayne's gut twisted. Kyle had always seemed like a good employee, someone who was willing to learn and improve. But now, there were serious questions about his integrity. Dwayne had to know for sure. This couldn't be handled lightly. If Kyle was the culprit, he'd need to be confronted directly. That evening, Dwayne asked Kyle to stay after hours for a private conversation. Kyle seemed nervous when he walked into Dwayne's office, but he smiled nonetheless. Hey, Dwayne, what's up? Kyle asked, taking a seat. Dwayne locked eyes with him. I need to talk to you about something serious, Kyle. We've been reviewing the contracts and the system's access logs, and I noticed something concerning. There have been some changes made to several contracts after the deals were finalized. Your login credentials are showing up in the logs every time these changes were made. Kyle's face drained of color. Wait, what? Don't try to deny it, Dwayne interjected. I want to know what happened. Why were these changes made? Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly struggling to come up with an explanation. His usual confidence was nowhere to be found. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt the dealership, Dwayne, Kyle said, his eyes avoiding Dwayne's gaze. It started out small. I was just trying to help out a few customers. They were asking for discounts or better financing options, and I thought I could adjust things in the system to make it happen. It wasn't supposed to be anything big. Dwayne's jaw clenched. So you've been manipulating contracts? Kyle nodded slowly, his voice shaky. Yeah, but it was never about the money for me, I swear. I just wanted to make sure people were happy. It's not like I was pocketing anything or trying to defraud the dealership. I just didn't think it would get this far. Dwayne took a deep breath, trying to process what he was hearing. Kyle wasn't the mastermind behind this. It seemed more like an impulsive, misguided attempt to help customers, but that didn't make it any less serious. You know how big of a deal this is, right? Dwayne asked, his voice cold now. You've been altering official documents without permission. This isn't just a mistake. It's a violation of trust. You're putting everything we've worked for at risk. I know, Dwayne. I know, Kyle said, his voice cracking. I didn't think it would hurt anyone, but I see now how much damage I've caused. I'm sorry. I really am. Dwayne stared at him, weighing his options. He had never expected to be in this position, especially with an employee he had trusted. But what mattered now was fixing the problem and ensuring it didn't happen again. Look, Kyle, Dwayne said, his tone softening slightly. This is serious. I can't just overlook what you've done, but I'm also willing to give you a chance to make things right. We're going to report everything to the authorities, and you'll have to face the consequences. But I want you to understand, if you're truly sorry, you can still make amends. This isn't the end of your career if you're willing to own up to it and help us fix the damage. Kyle looked up, tears welling in his eyes. Thank you, Dwayne. I won't let you down again. I promise. Dwayne nodded, his mind made up. They would move forward with integrity, as they always had. This wasn't the end of Johnson Motors, but it was another test of their resolve. They would clean up the mess, learn from it, and come out stronger than before. Later that night, as Dwayne reflected on the situation, he couldn't help but think about how one mistake, no matter how small, could ripple through an entire business. But he also knew that the key to success wasn't avoiding mistakes, but how you handled them when they occurred. As he stood in the dealership's lobby, looking out at the cars under the soft showroom lights, Dwayne felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just the owner of a business. He was the leader of a team, and together, they would overcome anything that came their way. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that the people you surround yourself with define the strength of your journey. And no matter how far off course things seemed, there was always room to turn it around with the right mindset. Now, it was time to move forward. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. After the conversation with Kyle, Dwayne knew he couldn't just sit back and let the situation play out on its own. He had to take control, not just for his business, but for the integrity of everyone involved. It was time for action. The first step was to contact the authorities. Dwayne didn't want to make any rash decisions, but the seriousness of the situation required transparency. He called Natalie Foster, the city's regulatory officer, and explained everything. It wasn't just about the discrepancies anymore. It was about admitting to the mistake, fixing it, and preventing it from ever happening again. I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Johnson, Natalie said when Dwayne explained the situation. It's not often that we see a business owner come forward like this. We'll begin an investigation into the matter, and we'll work with you to make sure everything gets sorted out. You're doing the right thing. Dwayne exhaled with a sense of relief. At least now he wasn't in this alone. He could only hope that the authorities would understand the nature of the mistake and work with them to resolve it. Meanwhile, Dwayne also had to address the rest of his team. He couldn't just brush this under the rug. They all needed to be on the same page moving forward. So, he called an all-staff meeting for the next morning. It was time to face the music and show the team that transparency was the only way forward. When the staff assembled in the dealership's meeting room, there was a palpable sense of tension in the air. Everyone had heard the rumors, and Dwayne could tell that they were wondering what was really going on. It was his job to clear the air. Everyone, I know there's been a lot of uncertainty around here lately, Dwayne began, standing in front of the group, and I want to be upfront with you about what's been happening. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He wasn't going to sugarcoat it. We've had some issues with contract discrepancies. There's been an investigation, and we've found that one of our team members, Carl Thompson, made unauthorized changes to several customer contracts. I've already spoken with him, and he's admitted to it. We're reporting everything to the authorities, and we're working with them to fix it. There were a few shocked gasps, and Dwayne could see the disbelief on some of their faces. But he continued, I'm telling you this not to point fingers, but because this dealership is built on trust, trust between us as a team, and trust with our customers. We've worked hard to get where we are, and I know this is a setback, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right. We're going to go through every contract, fix the discrepancies, and ensure that this never happens again. The room was silent for a few moments, but then Rick spoke up. Dwayne, we're all in this together. If there's anything we can do to help, we're behind you. Several other team members nodded in agreement. Dwayne could feel the weight lifting slightly from his shoulders. They were with him, and that meant everything. I appreciate that, Rick, Dwayne said, his voice steady. We're not going to let this define us. We're going to come out of this stronger. But we all need to be extra vigilant. From now on, every deal will be double-checked, and we're going to implement stricter controls. This is a learning experience, and we'll grow from it. As the days went on, the team worked tirelessly to review the contracts. Dwayne was in the trenches with them, personally going through every document to ensure everything was in order. It wasn't easy, but the team was determined to fix the damage and restore their reputation. Despite the pressure, Dwayne couldn't help but feel a growing sense of pride in the way his team was handling the situation. They weren't backing down. They weren't running away from the problem. They were facing it head-on. Then, late one evening, Dwayne received an unexpected visitor, Kyle. Dwayne looked up from his desk as the door to his office creaked open. Kyle stepped in, his expression solemn. "Dwayne, can we talk?" Kyle asked softly. Dwayne motioned for him to sit down. "Of course, Kyle. What's on your mind?" Kyle fidgeted with his hands before speaking. "I know I've already apologized, but there's something I need to say. I didn't realize at the time how far I'd gone. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping. But now I see how much damage I've caused, not just to the dealership, but to all of you, the people who trusted me. I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right. I'm willing to leave. I'll resign if it means you don't have to worry about me being a liability." Dwayne sat in silence for a moment, considering Kyle's words. It wasn't easy to hear, but it wasn't the first time someone had made a mistake in a business. What mattered now was what Kyle chose to do next. "Kyle, I appreciate your honesty," Dwayne said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not asking you to leave. What I need from you now is to take responsibility. Help us clean up the mess. We're going to face the consequences together. But if you're truly committed to making things right, then you're going to stay, and you're going to help us restore this dealership's reputation. If you're ready to put in the work, then I'm ready to give you another chance." Kyle looked up at Dwayne, his eyes wide with surprise. "You're really giving me another chance?" Dwayne nodded. "I am. But it's not just about fixing contracts. It's about earning back the trust of this team. You'll need to prove that you're willing to do whatever it takes." Kyle's face softened with relief. "I won't let you down again, Dwayne. I swear." The following weeks were filled with hard work, both in the dealership and behind the scenes. Dwayne and his team went through every contract, fixed the discrepancies, and worked closely with the regulatory office to ensure everything was transparent. Kyle, for his part, threw himself into the work, showing his commitment to making amends. Slowly but surely, Johnson Motors started to rebuild its reputation. The city's regulatory office acknowledged the dealership's efforts and even praised them for their transparency and willingness to cooperate. For Dwayne, the road to redemption wasn't easy. It had been filled with difficult decisions, personal challenges, and moments of doubt. But in the end, it wasn't just about surviving the crisis. It was about emerging from it stronger, wiser, and more unified than before. As Dwayne sat in his office late one evening, watching the showroom lights flicker off, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had faced a setback that could have destroyed everything, but instead, he had come out the other side with a deeper understanding of what it meant to lead with integrity. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that true leadership wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about how you dealt with them when they happened, and how you turned those moments into opportunities for growth. And with that, Dwayne knew that Johnson Motors was not only back on track, it was on its way to becoming something even greater than it had ever been before. As the weeks passed, the dealership began to stabilize. Dwayne and his team worked relentlessly, day after day, fixing the mistakes made and ensuring that the customers who had been affected by Kyle's actions were fully compensated. They offered refunds, free services, and sincere apologies. The dealership's public relations department worked on putting out a statement to the media to set the record straight, reaffirming their commitment to honesty and customer satisfaction. Even though the damage had been done, the process of rebuilding was not impossible. But it required more than just fixing paperwork. It needed to restore the trust of the community, the staff, and the customers. Dwayne wasn't about to let the legacy of Johnson Motors be defined by one mistake. One morning, Dwayne sat down with Rick and some of the senior staff in a small meeting room. They were going over the dealership's recovery plan, making sure that every detail was covered. But Dwayne's mind kept drifting back to Kyle. He was doing his best to earn back his place, but Dwayne had to wonder, was it enough? "Rick," Dwayne said, breaking the silence, "how's Kyle doing? Have you noticed any changes?" Rick, who had been keeping a close eye on Kyle, gave a thoughtful nod. "Honestly, Dwayne, he's been pulling his weight. He's putting in the hours, making sure everything's tight with the paperwork. The customers who were affected by his actions seemed to appreciate his efforts. He's genuinely remorseful, and he's showing it. Dwayne leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I just hope he truly understands what he's done. This is a lot bigger than just paperwork. This is about integrity. And that's something we can't afford to lose. Rick nodded again. I think he gets it. He's been more careful, more focused. I've seen him stay late every day, reviewing contracts, double-checking everything. He seems determined to prove himself. Dwayne's gaze softened. I think he deserves a chance. But it's up to him to make sure he doesn't slip again. We can't afford any more mistakes. Not after this. There was a moment of silence as both men took in the gravity of the situation. Finally, Dwayne spoke again. We're not just fixing mistakes, Rick. We're rebuilding a reputation. We need to be transparent with our customers and with each other. If we're going to come out of this, we have to stay united. The next week, Dwayne received an email from a longtime customer, Mr. Harrington, who had bought several cars from the dealership over the years. Mr. Harrington had been one of the affected customers who had received an altered contract. His email was direct and clear. He wanted to meet with Dwayne in person. When Dwayne read the email, he knew that this was a moment of reckoning. Mr. Harrington wasn't just any customer. He was one of their most loyal. If Dwayne could make things right with him, the rest of the community would follow. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. When Mr. Harrington arrived at the dealership, Dwayne personally greeted him in the lobby. Mr. Harrington, it's good to see you, Dwayne said, extending his hand. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. Mr. Harrington shook his hand firmly, but there was a trace of tension in his posture. He had every right to be upset. Dwayne understood that. I'll get straight to the point, Dwayne, Mr. Harrington said, sitting down across from him. I've been a loyal customer for years, and this doesn't sit right with me. I was lied to. My contract was altered without my knowledge. And I don't care about the excuses. This dealership has built its reputation on trust, and you've broken that. Dwayne felt a pang of guilt, but he also knew that Mr. Harrington was right to be upset. He owed him the truth, and more than that, a solution. Mr. Harrington, I understand your frustration, Dwayne said, his voice calm but sincere. You're right. We made a mistake, and it was a serious one. But I want you to know that we're doing everything we can to make things right. We're reviewing every contract, making sure no one else has been affected. And most importantly, we've put measures in place to ensure this will never happen again. Mr. Harrington studied Dwayne's face for a moment before responding. I don't need promises, Dwayne. I need results. I need to know that this won't happen again, and I need to feel like my trust is earned back. Dwayne leaned forward slightly. I completely understand. That's why we're offering a full refund, no questions asked. And I'm personally overseeing everything, so there's complete transparency. If you're willing to give us another chance, we'll make it right. Mr. Harrington paused. He didn't say anything for a few moments, which made Dwayne's heart race. Finally, Mr. Harrington sighed. I've been coming here for years, Dwayne, and I've seen how you've built this place up. I want to believe that this was a one-time mistake and that you're doing everything you can to fix it. I'll give you another chance. But you better make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. Dwayne nodded earnestly. You have my word, and I promise you, we will never take your trust for granted again. As Mr. Harrington walked out of the dealership, Dwayne felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was a huge win. They had repaired one of their most important relationships, and that was a step in the right direction. Over the following months, Dwayne and his team continued to work hard on rebuilding the dealership's reputation. They implemented tighter controls, invested in employee training, and made customer service a top priority. While there were still a few disgruntled customers who voiced their dissatisfaction, the majority of the community rallied behind Johnson Motors. Through it all, Dwayne learned a valuable lesson. The road to recovery was not about pretending the problem didn't exist. It was about owning up to it, fixing it, and moving forward with integrity. The dealership was starting to thrive again. Sales numbers began to climb, customer satisfaction returned to high levels, and Dwayne felt the confidence of his team growing. He had learned firsthand that leadership wasn't just about achieving success, it was about how you responded when things went wrong. One late evening, Dwayne stood in the showroom, looking out at the rows of cars gleaming under the lights. The road had been long, but they had made it through. There were still challenges ahead, but Dwayne felt ready for them. He had weathered the storm, and the dealership had emerged stronger for it. As he glanced around the showroom, his eyes landed on a banner near the front of the dealership, a quote emblazoned across it. "Trust is earned, not given." Dwayne smiled softly to himself. He had earned the trust of his team, his customers, and himself. Now, the journey continued. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the unwavering belief that no matter how many times you fall, the key to success is getting back up again. And with every step, you become stronger. It had been a few months since the dealership had started to rebuild its reputation, and things were finally starting to settle down. Dwayne had noticed a positive shift within his team. The atmosphere at Johnson Motors had gone from tense and uncertain to one of hope and resilience. They were moving forward, but the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air, always present but no longer suffocating. One crisp morning, as Dwayne was finishing up a meeting with his sales team, a delivery truck pulled up to the front of the dealership. It wasn't unusual for deliveries to come in throughout the day, but this one caught Dwayne's attention because of the large, unmarked crate being offloaded. Rick, who had been walking down the hallway, noticed it too. "What's that?" he asked, eyeing the crate with curiosity. "I have no idea," Dwayne said, his interest piqued. "I'll check it out." As they approached, the delivery driver greeted them with a nod. "Got a special delivery here for Mr. Johnson. Signed for it." Dwayne took the clipboard from the driver and looked at the paperwork. It had no return address, and the sender was listed as simply anonymous. "That's odd," Dwayne muttered as he signed for it. "What's inside?" The driver gave a shrug. "Couldn't tell you. It was already sealed up tight when we got it." Dwayne and Rick moved to the back of the showroom, where they could open the crate privately. With a swift motion, Dwayne cut through the packing tape and opened the box. Inside, wrapped in several layers of bubble wrap, was a pristine, high-end sports car key. Along with the key was a note. Rick took the note and read aloud. "Sometimes the most valuable things come when you least expect it. Consider this the next chapter. A friend." Dwayne stared at the key in his hand. A sports car key? This was no ordinary gift. "Is this some kind of prank?" Rick asked, furrowing his brows. "I don't know, but someone went through a lot of effort to send this," Dwayne said, deep in thought. He paused for a moment. "I've got a feeling this isn't just about the car." Later that day, Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this mysterious gift. He called his trusted mechanic, Jason, and asked if he could take a look at the car, if it was real or just some sort of elaborate joke. Jason agreed to meet him at the shop after hours, and by the time evening rolled around, Dwayne found himself in the dimly lit garage with Jason and Rick, eager to see what the key opened. Jason inserted the key into a sleek, dark blue sports car that seemed too luxurious to be just an ordinary vehicle. It had custom rims, a shiny leather interior, and a distinct J logo on the door, a design Dwayne didn't recognize. "Whoever owns this has some serious taste," Jason said, inspecting the car. "But I've never seen a model like this. This doesn't seem like a factory version. This is one of a kind." Dwayne's mind raced as he pieced together what this could mean. Was this a gift? A challenge? Or a sign from someone who wanted to offer their support? Who would send something like this? Rick asked, clearly perplexed. "I don't know," Dwayne said, rubbing his temples, "but we need to find out." They spent the next few hours trying to gather more information. Dwayne contacted his old friends in the industry, asking if anyone knew of a car manufacturer or custom shop that could have made something like this. Nothing turned up. The mystery deepened with every minute. The next day, as Dwayne arrived at the dealership, he was surprised to see a familiar face standing by the front entrance. It was Kyle. "Morning, Dwayne," Kyle greeted him, looking anxious. "I know you're probably busy, but I think I have something you need to see." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Kyle walked over to Dwayne, glancing around nervously as if he was about to share a big secret. "I know who sent you that car." Dwayne's curiosity piqued. "Who?" Kyle looked around once more before speaking quietly. "It's me." Dwayne blinked, trying to process what Kyle had just said. "You? You sent me the car?" Kyle nodded. his expression sheepish. I know it seems strange, but hear me out. I wanted to make up for what I did, and I know a simple apology isn't going to cut it. I thought, maybe, if I could do something big, something that really showed I was serious about fixing things, I could prove I wasn't just sorry. I wanted to do something that showed I really cared. Dwayne stood there, stunned. This wasn't what he expected at all. I've been saving up for years, Dwayne, Kyle continued, his voice breaking a little. I've been working hard to put aside some money, and I thought, maybe this would be a way to help, a way to start fresh, a way to show you that I'm not the same person I was when I made those mistakes. Dwayne was at a loss for words. He hadn't expected Kyle to go this far, especially not after everything that had happened. You don't have to do this, Kyle, Dwayne said, his voice calm but filled with emotion. What happened was a mistake, yes, but you've been doing the work to make it right. That's all anyone could ask for. I know, but I wanted to show you, and the team, that I'm serious about making amends. I don't want you to think I'm just doing the bare minimum. This is a new chapter for me, and for the dealership, too. Dwayne felt a mixture of emotions. Part of him was touched by Kyle's gesture, but another part of him was hesitant. A sports car wasn't exactly the solution to the problems they'd faced. However, the sentiment behind it, the effort, the sincerity, was undeniable. Kyle, Dwayne began slowly, I appreciate the gesture. I really do. But the truth is, no gift, no matter how expensive, can replace what you've done to earn back the team's trust. What you're doing now, the work you're putting in every day, that's what matters most. And that's what's going to define you going forward. Kyle nodded, looking down at the ground. I understand. I wanted to show you that I'm all in, that I'm not just going to walk away from this. I want to be part of the team again. Dwayne placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder. And you are. You're already doing the work, Kyle. That's what counts. And I'm proud of you for it. As the days passed, Dwayne's mind kept returning to the mystery of the sports car. It was a beautiful piece of machinery, but in the end, Dwayne knew that the road to redemption was not paved with extravagant gifts. It was paved with hard work, accountability, and rebuilding the trust that had been broken. As for Kyle, Dwayne decided to keep the car, but not as a gift. It would become part of a community event to raise funds for a local charity. It would be a way to give back, a way to show that no matter the past, they could move forward together. With that decision, Dwayne felt a sense of closure. It was the right step for both himself and the dealership. And with each passing day, the weight of the past seemed just a little bit lighter. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the reminder that real change wasn't in the flashy gestures. It was in the actions taken every day to make things right. And with every action, no matter how small, he knew they were moving towards something better. With the charity event planned for the car, things at Johnson Motors were beginning to settle into a new routine. Dwayne was focused on continuing the dealership's recovery, ensuring the team remained motivated, and watching as Kyle put in the hard work to regain the trust of his coworkers. It was a challenging but hopeful time. The sense of urgency from the past months had diminished, but the determination to rebuild was still strong. But just as things seemed to be moving forward smoothly, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as Dwayne sat at his desk going through inventory reports, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Rick. Got a visitor at the front desk. Says it's urgent. Wants to speak to you. Dwayne furrowed his brow. He wasn't expecting anyone. He grabbed his jacket and headed out to the front of the dealership. As he walked toward the entrance, he saw a tall, middle-aged man standing with a confident air, his expensive-looking suit and slicked-back hair making him stand out. Mr. Johnson, the man said as soon as he saw Dwayne. Dwayne nodded cautiously. Yes, that's me. Can I help you? The man extended his hand with a professional smile. My name's Edward Coleman. I'm an investor with an interest in the automotive industry. I've been following your dealership's recent journey, and I must say, I'm impressed with how you've handled the challenges you've faced. Dwayne took his hand, still unsure of where this conversation was going. Thank you. We've had our fair share of struggles, but we're pushing forward. What can I do for you? Edward's smile widened slightly. Well, Mr. Johnson, I'm actually here because I'm very interested in potentially partnering with you and investing in Johnson Motors. Dwayne's eyebrows rose. This was not the conversation he was expecting. I'm listening, Dwayne said, gesturing for Edward to follow him into the nearby meeting room. As they sat down, Edward leaned forward, his tone serious but not without a hint of excitement. I've been looking at opportunities for growth in the automotive market. What you've done here, turning around this dealership after the turmoil, it's impressive. You've rebuilt trust with your customers, and that's something that's worth investing in. Dwayne crossed his arms, still processing. You think there's potential here? Absolutely, Edward replied. The market is ripe for innovation, and I believe Johnson Motors has the foundation to become a key player, not just locally, but nationally. With the right investment, the right expansion, you could grow this business exponentially. Dwayne sat back, his mind racing. This was the kind of opportunity he had always dreamed of, but it came with its own set of challenges. Taking on an investor meant losing some control, but it could also provide the financial backing to elevate the dealership to a whole new level. I'll be honest, Edward, Dwayne said, leaning forward. I'm intrigued, but I'm also cautious. We've been through a lot recently, and I need to be sure that any partnership will help the dealership, not hurt it. Edward nodded understandingly. Of course. I respect that. What I'm proposing is a strategic partnership. I don't want to interfere with your day-to-day operations, but I want to help fund the growth. We'd focus on expanding the brand, improving technology, and scaling the operations in a way that keeps everything aligned with your vision. Dwayne thought for a moment. He was a man of principle, and he didn't want to sacrifice his values for the sake of profit. But Edward seemed genuine, and the idea of taking Johnson Motors to the next level was undeniably appealing. We'll need time to discuss this internally, Dwayne said. I'll need to talk it over with my team and figure out if this is the right direction for us. But I appreciate your offer, and I'll get back to you soon. Edward smiled. I completely understand. Take your time. I'll leave you with my contact information. I believe in this business, Mr. Johnson, and I think we can do something incredible together. As Dwayne walked Edward out of the dealership, his mind was racing. A partnership could be the thing that took Johnson Motors from a small, local dealership to a recognized brand across the country. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about maintaining the integrity that had defined them, even through the toughest times. That evening, Dwayne gathered Rick, Kyle, and the senior members of the team to discuss the proposal. They sat in the conference room, a somber air settling over the group as Dwayne explained Edward's offer. This is a huge decision for the future of the dealership, Dwayne began. I'm leaning toward taking the investment, but I want to hear what you all think. We've worked hard to get here, and I need to make sure that whatever decision we make, it's the right one for everyone. Kyle, who had been noticeably quieter than usual, spoke up first. I think it could be a great opportunity. We've come a long way, but there's only so much we can do on our own. If we want to keep growing, we'll need more resources. If Edward is as genuine as he seems, this could really help us take things to the next level. Rick nodded in agreement. I've seen a lot of businesses grow with the right investment. But Dwayne's right, there's a balance we need to strike. We've worked hard to build our reputation, and we don't want to lose that. We'll need to be careful about how much control we give up. Dwayne listened to their feedback, weighing each opinion carefully. This wasn't just about growth. It was about maintaining the core values that had made Johnson Motors successful in the first place. He didn't want to compromise their principles, no matter how big the potential reward was. The next day, Dwayne called Edward to set up a follow-up meeting. He had made up his mind. He was open to the investment, but he had a list of conditions that he wanted to ensure were met. He would need control over the brand's direction, a say in key decisions, and most importantly, a commitment to maintaining the dealership's core values of integrity and customer service. 2 weeks later, the terms were agreed upon, and Dwayne signed a deal with Edward Coleman. The investment was a game-changer for Johnson Motors, and Dwayne felt a surge of optimism as he envisioned the future of the business. But even as they moved forward with the new partnership, Dwayne knew that the hardest work was still ahead of them. The road to true success was never easy, and there were always obstacles to overcome. But with a solid team, the right values, and the right guidance, he knew they could face anything that came their way. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the knowledge that growth wasn't just about financial success. It was about staying true to who you were, even when the world around you changed. And with that in mind, he was ready for whatever the future had in store. The days following the signing of the deal with Edward Coleman felt like a whirlwind for Dwayne and his team. It wasn't just the excitement of the partnership. It was the careful balance of navigating growth while staying true to the values they had fought so hard to preserve. Every conversation seemed to raise new questions, and every decision felt more crucial than ever. One morning, Dwayne sat down with Rick and Kyle to discuss the upcoming strategy meeting with Edward's team. The room was buzzing with nervous energy as they tried to figure out how to best approach the upcoming changes. The deal was in motion, but the future still felt uncertain. "So, we've got to make sure we lay out our expectations clearly," Dwayne said, his voice calm but firm. "Edward's bringing a lot to the table, but this is still our company, our culture. We've worked hard to get to this point, and we're not compromising on what matters most." Kyle, who had been more enthusiastic about the partnership, nodded. "Absolutely. The investment's a great opportunity, but we have to ensure that we don't lose sight of what makes Johnson Motors different. We can grow without losing the heart of what we've built." Rick leaned in, rubbing his hands together. "We also need to be clear about how much control we're comfortable giving up. If they want to push for aggressive expansion, we've got to make sure it doesn't take away from our commitment to our community and customers." Dwayne agreed. "That's the big question. How do we expand without becoming something we don't recognize? How do we keep the personal touch, the family atmosphere, while scaling?" The day of the strategy meeting arrived, and Dwayne felt the weight of the decisions ahead. Edward and his team were ready to get down to business, and the meeting room was filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. As Dwayne walked into the room, he was greeted by Edward, who immediately shook his hand with enthusiasm. "Mr. Johnson, it's great to see you," Edward said, a smile stretching across his face. "I'm excited to dive into the next steps." Dwayne returned the smile but couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was going to set the tone for everything to come. He motioned for everyone to sit. "We're all excited about this partnership," Dwayne began. "But before we get too far into expansion plans, I want to make one thing clear. Johnson Motors is a family business. We've built something here that's based on trust, community, and personal relationships. Those values are non-negotiable." Edward nodded, his expression serious. "Of course. I respect that, and I think that's why I was so drawn to this opportunity in the first place. I've seen the passion you've put into this company, and I want to make sure we don't lose that." Dwayne held up a hand. "I appreciate that, but we need a clear roadmap to ensure we're always putting the customer first. If we're going to grow, we need to scale carefully. This isn't just about increasing sales. It's about maintaining the trust we've built." Edward leaned back in his chair, clearly listening. "I completely understand. I don't want to push you into anything that compromises your values. What I'm proposing is a phased approach to expansion. We'll start small, focusing on the local market first. Once we see how the model works, we can branch out. It won't be a rapid takeover. It'll be a measured approach." Kyle looked at Dwayne, who gave a subtle nod. It seemed like Edward was taking their concerns seriously. "I'm comfortable with that," Kyle said. "If we can keep the expansion slow and controlled, we can make sure that we're always doing right by our customers. As long as we don't lose the personal touch, this could work." Rick, who had been silent for a while, spoke up. "And we need a guarantee that we'll retain full control over the dealership's day-to-day operations. We don't want anyone telling us how to interact with our customers. That's the essence of Johnson Motors." Edward smiled. "Agreed. You will always have control over the day-to-day. My role here is to provide the financial backing and strategic guidance when needed. You'll still lead the company in the way that you see fit." As the meeting continued, Dwayne felt more at ease. It was clear that Edward was committed to their vision, and he was willing to make the necessary compromises to ensure the partnership worked. There would be challenges ahead, but they were in a stronger position now than they had ever been. A few weeks later, the first signs of the partnership's impact began to show. The dealership received its first significant investment in marketing, focusing on expanding the brand's presence in the local area. They were able to hire new staff, improve their facilities, and increase inventory, all while maintaining the same high standards they had always set. For Dwayne, it felt like a new chapter for Johnson Motors, one that was full of promise. But even as they celebrated their progress, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there were still challenges ahead. The automotive industry was competitive, and they were entering uncharted waters. But he had always believed in his team, and he was more confident than ever that they could face whatever came next. As the dealership began to grow, the changes were noticeable. The showroom was more bustling than ever, with customers lining up to test drive cars. The new marketing campaigns were working, and more people were taking notice of Johnson Motors. But amidst all the success, Dwayne made sure that the heart of the business remained the same. He and his team worked hard to ensure that every customer who walked through the door felt like family, that every car sold came with the same personal touch that had made Johnson Motors a trusted name in the community. One evening, as Dwayne sat in his office looking over sales reports, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy, but every setback had led to this moment, the opportunity to build something even greater. He looked at the framed picture on his desk, a photo of the dealership when it first opened, with a younger version of himself standing proudly in front of the cars. He smiled at the memory. "Every decision we've made has led us here," he said to himself, a quiet sense of pride settling in. "And we're just getting started." That night, as Dwayne walked out of the dealership, he looked up at the sky. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had the right team, the right values, and the right vision to make this work. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that they could create something lasting, something that would endure beyond the challenges they faced. And with each new day, he was more determined than ever to make that dream a reality. The momentum from the partnership with Edward Coleman continued to build at Johnson Motors. The showroom had seen an uptick in customer traffic, the staff was motivated, and Dwayne's vision of a local powerhouse dealership was beginning to take shape. But as with every success story, there were still bumps on the road. Some expected, others completely out of left field. One afternoon, just a month after the big changes, Dwayne sat down with Rick to discuss the dealership's growth. Sales numbers were up, but there were signs that things were starting to feel a little too fast-paced. The dealership had expanded its inventory, added new salespeople, and even opened a customer service department to handle the influx of business. But with the growth came logistical problems, and not all of them were easy fixes. "Rick, I don't know about you, but I feel like we're moving a little too fast," Dwayne said, looking at the inventory projections on his laptop. "We're getting more cars in, but our lot's starting to look crowded. I'm worried we're losing the customer experience by trying to accommodate all this growth at once." Rick, ever the realist, nodded slowly. "I hear you. We've been pushing for the expansion, and the marketing's paying off, but we might have overextended ourselves. The service side isn't keeping up, either. We've had complaints about wait times and not enough staff to handle all the customer inquiries. We need to make sure our service matches the growth." Dwayne rubbed his temples. "Exactly. I don't want us to lose the personal touch, the thing that's made us stand out. We can't be just another dealership. We've got to keep that quality intact while we grow." Rick paused, then added, "Have you talked to Edward about this? Maybe he can help us streamline the operation or invest in better systems." Dwayne sighed. "I'm not sure. I don't want to sound ungrateful for the investment, but I feel like we're jumping into the deep end without a solid plan. We need to get our foundation in place before we can handle a bigger business." That evening, Dwayne sent an email to Edward, requesting a meeting to discuss the dealership's operational issues. The next morning, they set up a call. Edward, always quick to respond, was eager to discuss the concerns. The phone rang, and Dwayne answered. "Edward, good to hear from you." "Likewise, Dwayne. I've been keeping an eye on the numbers, and things seem to be moving well. What's on your mind?" Dwayne got straight to the point. "I've been thinking a lot about the recent growth, and I think we may be expanding too quickly. Our inventory's growing fast, but we don't have the infrastructure to support it. Our lot's packed, and we've had some complaints about wait times and customer service. I'm concerned that if we don't address these issues, we'll end up compromising our brand." Edward was quiet for a moment, then responded thoughtfully. "I see what you're saying. When you're moving at this pace, things can slip through the cracks. What do you think we should do to get back on track?" Dwayne leaned forward in his chair. I think we need to slow down the expansion for a bit and focus on building a solid foundation. Let's refine our processes, upgrade our customer service systems, and get the right staff in place before we push forward with more growth. I don't want to risk losing our identity as we scale up. Edward was quiet for a moment before speaking again. I understand your concerns, Dwayne. We don't want to rush into anything without making sure the foundation is strong. Let's pause the next round of inventory orders and focus on the infrastructure first. I'll help fund whatever upgrades you need to get the systems in place. We can always scale back up once we're ready. Dwayne felt a wave of relief wash over him. Edward was, as usual, willing to listen and collaborate. They'd found common ground, and now they just had to follow through on the plan. Over the next few weeks, Dwayne and his team worked tirelessly to address the operational issues. They upgraded the inventory management system to improve stock tracking, hired additional staff for customer service, and implemented training programs for the sales team to ensure everyone was on the same page. The lot was restructured, with a more streamlined flow to ensure better organization and easier access for customers. But just when they thought things were starting to stabilize, another challenge arose. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Dwayne walked into the dealership and was immediately greeted by Rick's worried face. "We've got a problem, Dwayne," Rick said, pulling him aside. "A big one." "What's going on?" Dwayne asked, concern creeping into his voice. "It's the supplier. There's been a mix-up with one of the car shipments. We've received a batch of vehicles that don't meet our standards. A few of them have faulty engines and others have cosmetic defects. Our customers are starting to notice, and some are demanding refunds or replacements." Dwayne's stomach sank. This wasn't the kind of news he wanted to hear after everything they've been working on. "How many cars are we talking about?" Dwayne asked, already mentally calculating how this could affect their reputation. "About 20 cars, including some of the newer models we've been promoting. It's a significant issue, especially because we've been advertising them so heavily. If this gets out, it could damage our reputation," Rick replied. Dwayne ran a hand through his hair. This was a major setback, and they needed to handle it quickly. "What's the plan for fixing it?" "We're already in touch with the supplier. They're offering replacements, but it'll take a few weeks for the new cars to come in," Rick explained. "In the meantime, we've been offering refunds to customers who've complained, but it's putting a dent in our cash flow. I think we need to make sure we communicate this carefully to our customers and offer them compensation to avoid bad publicity." Dwayne nodded. "We'll make it right. Let's get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. We'll issue a public apology and offer affected customers discounts or incentives for their next purchase. And I want to personally reach out to the customers who were impacted." That afternoon, Dwayne recorded a video message, which he personally posted on the dealership's social media platforms. In the message, he apologized for the defective cars, explained the situation, and reassured customers that they were doing everything they could to resolve the issue swiftly. He also offered those affected a choice of compensation, including discounts on future purchases and complimentary services. While it wasn't the ideal scenario, Dwayne knew that transparency and accountability were the only ways to maintain trust with their customers. The next few days were tense as they worked with the supplier to replace the faulty cars. The dealership's reputation took a small hit, but Dwayne was determined to turn the situation around. The customer service team was on the front lines, handling complaints and offering solutions with as much care and empathy as possible. And through it all, Dwayne realized something important: growth would never be without challenges. But with the right mindset, the right team, and a commitment to doing what was right, they could handle anything that came their way. As the storm began to pass, Dwayne looked at his team, at the people who had worked so hard to get Johnson Motors back on its feet. There was still much to do, but for the first time in a while, he felt hopeful. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that the right values, the ones that had brought him this far, were always worth fighting for. Even in the toughest times, those values would guide them, and they would come out stronger on the other side. As the weeks passed, the storm surrounding the defective car incident gradually subsided. The new inventory arrived, and customer satisfaction slowly returned to normal. But the experience had left a lasting impact on Dwayne, reminding him of the importance of staying vigilant and humble, even in the face of success. Dwayne spent much of his time reflecting, both on the current state of Johnson Motors and on the journey that had brought them here. He often found himself walking the lot, thinking back to the early days when things had been simpler, when it was just him and a handful of employees trying to make something out of nothing. But now, things had grown. The company was expanding rapidly, and the responsibility had become overwhelming at times. That evening, Dwayne invited Rick and Kyle to dinner at his favorite local diner. They had been through a lot together, and Dwayne felt it was important to check in with them, especially as the company moved forward into a new phase. Over burgers and fries, they discussed everything from the challenges of expansion to the lessons they'd learned from the recent hiccup with the faulty cars. Dwayne was glad to hear that both Rick and Kyle shared his concerns about keeping the company grounded. "I've been thinking about what happened with the cars," Dwayne said, after taking a sip of his drink. "It's funny, you know? We've been so focused on growth that we kind of forgot about the basics, the little things that really make us stand out. Things like quality control, personal customer service, and making sure our supply chain is as solid as it can be." Rick nodded. "It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of expansion. Everyone's excited about the future, but sometimes you need to take a step back and remember why we started this in the first place." Kyle added, "I think this is the best time to refocus. We've built a strong foundation, but now we need to refine it. Instead of always looking at what's next, let's concentrate on making sure our current systems and processes are rock solid." Dwayne agreed. "Exactly. We can't let the drive for growth overshadow the core values that made Johnson Motors what it is today. I'm going to take some time and think about how we can streamline operations and set up a better system to handle these growing pains." The next few weeks were marked by careful planning and strategic tweaks. Dwayne personally oversaw the implementation of a new customer feedback system, which allowed them to address issues faster and more efficiently. They also revamped their quality control procedures to ensure that no more vehicles made it to the lot without a thorough inspection. Dwayne was starting to feel like they were finding their rhythm again, balancing growth with quality, ambition with authenticity. But just as they were getting back on track, a new challenge arose, one that threatened to test their progress in a very different way. It started with an email from Edward. The subject line read, "Urgent, Expansion Proposal." Dwayne opened the email and read through it carefully. Edward was proposing a large-scale, nationwide expansion, a plan that would involve opening multiple new dealerships in major cities across the country within the next year. The investment would be significant, but so would the potential rewards. It was a golden opportunity, at least on paper, but Dwayne couldn't ignore the doubts creeping into his mind. They had only just begun to manage the growth they already had. The thought of spreading themselves too thin, too quickly, was unsettling. He knew that if they rushed this expansion without the right infrastructure, it could end badly. That evening, Dwayne called a meeting with Rick and Kyle to discuss the proposal. "This email just came in from Edward," Dwayne said, passing his phone around. "He's suggesting we expand nationwide and fast. The numbers look good, but I'm not sure if we're ready for that kind of leap." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Nationwide? That's huge. We've been focusing on local growth, building strong roots before we branch out." "I agree," Kyle said, looking at the proposal. "It's tempting, especially with Edward backing it, but we have to think about whether we're equipped to handle something like this. It could be a huge drain on our resources." Dwayne leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the edge of the table. "Exactly. If we do this, we have to make sure we've got the infrastructure, the people, and the systems in place to support it. Rushing into this could undo everything we've worked for." After a long discussion, they all agreed on one thing. They needed to slow down. There was no reason to rush into a nationwide expansion. They would continue to focus on strengthening the local market, refine their operations further, and maybe in the future, they could consider expanding to neighboring states. "Let's reach out to Edward and let him know we're not ready for such a big leap just yet," Dwayne said, finally feeling confident in their decision. "We'll keep the lines of communication open, but right now, we need to focus on building a strong, sustainable business." The following day, Dwayne called Edward to discuss their decision. Edward was, of course, disappointed, but he understood their reasoning. "I respect your decision, Dwayne," Edward said over the phone. "It's important to be cautious and make sure everything's in place before you take that kind of step. Let's stay in touch, and keep the conversation open. When the time is right, we'll be ready to move forward. Dwayne felt a weight lifted off his shoulders after the conversation. Edward had always been supportive, and this time was no different. They weren't turning down the opportunity forever. They were just choosing to wait until the right moment. As the days passed, Dwayne's sense of peace returned. They had made the right decision, and it felt good to have control over the pace of their growth. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't worried about the future. He was focused on the present, on improving the customer experience, strengthening their operations, and keeping the family atmosphere that had always been at the heart of Johnson Motors. One evening, as he sat in his office, looking at a picture from the dealership's early days, a picture of him standing in front of a modest row of cars, Dwayne smiled. They had come a long way, but one thing had never changed: their commitment to quality, to their community, and to each other. That was the foundation they had built their success on, and it would be the foundation that carried them into the future. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, the answer had always been the same: staying true to the values that had made Johnson Motors a success in the first place. With that guiding principle, there was no challenge too great, no roadblock too high to overcome. The road ahead would certainly be filled with obstacles, but as long as they stayed grounded, focused, and true to their mission, Dwayne was confident they could handle anything that came their way. The journey was far from over, but it was one he was ready to face, alongside the team he had come to rely on more than anything. It seemed like things were finally settling into place for Johnson Motors. The operational improvements were paying off, the customers were happy, and the future seemed bright. But in business, as Dwayne had learned time and time again, things could turn on a dime. Even when everything seemed perfect, there was always the risk of something unexpected cropping up. It came in the form of a phone call late one Friday afternoon. Dwayne had just wrapped up a meeting with Rick and Kyle, discussing how they would continue their marketing push in the coming months. Things were looking promising for the first quarter of the year, and Dwayne was feeling good about where the business was headed. He was looking forward to a weekend with his family, a much-needed break after the intense few months of managing the dealership's growth. Then, his phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Edward Coleman." Dwayne's stomach tightened as he answered. "Edward, what's up?" "Dwayne." Edward's voice was unusually serious. "We need to talk. It's about the dealership." Dwayne's heart skipped a beat. Edward was usually calm, always level-headed. Hearing him sound so urgent set off an alarm in Dwayne's mind. "What happened? Is everything okay?" "I don't know how to say this, but there's something you need to know," Edward replied, his tone grave. "I've just gotten word from one of the senior managers at the company I've been working with. They've been siphoning off funds from Johnson Motors for the last few months." Dwayne's mind went blank. "What?" "I know this sounds crazy, but I've seen the records. There's an employee, someone in the finance department, who's been embezzling money. And I'm afraid it's been going on for longer than we realized." Dwayne felt the world spin. He sat down at his desk, his hand gripping the edge of it tightly. "Who's responsible? Do we have a name?" Edward sighed. "It's Kyle." Dwayne's world seemed to collapse in on itself. Kyle had been a trusted friend, a loyal part of the team. The thought that someone so close to him could betray him was almost unbearable. "Kyle?" Dwayne whispered. "Are you sure?" "I'm afraid so," Edward replied. "I've been going over the books, and it doesn't add up. A large sum of money has been funneled out of the company accounts, and there's no way it's been a mistake. I know you two are close, but we need to take action before this becomes a bigger issue. This could destroy everything you've built." Dwayne could hardly believe what he was hearing. Kyle, the man who had stood by him through thick and thin, who had been there during the darkest moments, now stood accused of betraying him and the company. The emotional toll was immense. "I need to confront him," Dwayne said, his voice steady but strained. "I need to hear it from him." "Of course," Edward replied. "But be careful, Dwayne. If this is true, he's going to be desperate. He might try to cover his tracks or even deny everything. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment." Dwayne ended the call and sat there in silence, the weight of the accusation pressing down on him like a ton of bricks. He couldn't understand how this could happen, how someone he trusted so deeply could betray him like this. But there was no denying the evidence. The numbers didn't lie. After a few moments, he composed himself. He needed to act fast. The longer this went on, the more damage it would cause to the dealership's reputation. But more than that, Dwayne knew that he needed answers, and he needed them from Kyle. The drive to the dealership felt like an eternity. Dwayne's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: shock, betrayal, anger. He had been through so many challenges, and this one felt like the hardest by far. The idea of losing a friend, a trusted business partner, weighed heavily on him. When Dwayne arrived at the dealership, he spotted Kyle's car in the parking lot. It was late, and the lot was mostly empty. He walked inside, his footsteps echoing in the quiet showroom. "Kyle?" Dwayne called out as he entered the back office. Kyle looked up from his desk, his face lighting up with a smile when he saw Dwayne. "Hey, Dwayne. What's going on? I wasn't expecting you tonight." Dwayne forced a smile, but there was no hiding the tension in his voice. "We need to talk. It's about the finances." Kyle's smile faltered, and he stood up from his desk, clearly sensing the gravity of the situation. "What about the finances? Everything's been running smoothly, right?" Dwayne didn't waste any time. "Edward called me earlier. He's discovered discrepancies in the books. Large sums of money have been taken out of the company accounts. I need to know if you're involved, Kyle. I need you to be honest with me." Kyle's face turned pale, and he took a step back. "What are you talking about? That's crazy. You think I'd steal from the company? I've been with you from the beginning." "I know you have," Dwayne said, his voice tight. "But the numbers don't lie. I need to hear it from you, Kyle. If you're responsible, we need to fix this before it goes any further. But I won't stand for lies." There was a long pause. Kyle's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape. Then, finally, he sighed. "You're right," Kyle said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could stop before it went too deep. But once I started, I couldn't stop." Dwayne felt his heart sink. "You've been stealing from us?" Kyle nodded, his face flushed with shame. "It started small, a few thousand here and there. I convinced myself it was just a temporary thing, that I'd pay it back. But when the dealership started expanding, I thought maybe no one would notice. I'm sorry, Dwayne. I really am." The confession hit Dwayne like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, struggling to make sense of the betrayal. Kyle had been a friend, someone he'd trusted completely. Now, that trust was shattered. "Why didn't you come to me?" Dwayne asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Why didn't you ask for help? If you were struggling, we could have figured something out." "I didn't want to disappoint you," Kyle admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it on my own. I never meant for it to go this far." Dwayne took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "This isn't something we can fix just between us. I have to report this. I can't cover for you, Kyle. I'm sorry." The next few days were a whirlwind. Dwayne contacted his lawyer, and after a thorough investigation, the extent of Kyle's embezzlement was revealed. It was bad, worse than Dwayne had initially thought. Kyle had been siphoning money for nearly a year, using clever methods to cover his tracks. The amount he had stolen was enough to put a major dent in Johnson Motors' finances. Kyle was arrested, and Dwayne was forced to make a public statement about the situation. The press was quick to pick up the story, and the fallout was immediate. Customers, employees, and even business partners were shocked by the betrayal. Dwayne knew he had to act quickly to salvage the reputation of the dealership. In the midst of all this chaos, Dwayne learned a valuable lesson about trust and the complexities of business relationships. It wasn't just about building a successful company. It was about knowing the people you worked with and understanding the pressures they were under. Kyle's betrayal had shaken him to his core, but Dwayne was determined not to let it destroy everything they had worked for. The road ahead would be challenging, but Dwayne was ready to face it head-on. He had learned that even in the darkest moments, the strength of the team and the core values of the company could get them through anything. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the resilience to keep going, no matter what. He knew that setbacks were inevitable, but the key was to rise stronger from them. And with the lessons learned from the past, he was ready to lead Johnson Motors into the future, one step at a time. The weeks following Kyle's arrest were filled with difficult decisions and hard lessons. Dwayne spent his days addressing the fallout from the scandal, repairing relationships with key business partners, and rebuilding the trust of his employees. The situation had been painful, and the emotional toll was far greater than he had anticipated. But amid the challenges, one thing became clear. Johnson Motors was stronger than the betrayal. They had a foundation that no scandal could break, an unwavering commitment to integrity, customer service, and community. Dwayne stood at the front of the showroom one morning, surveying the lot as he had countless times before. But today felt different. Today, he wasn't just managing the dealership, he was reimagining its future. The events of the past months had given him a new perspective on what mattered most, and he was determined to use this painful experience as fuel for positive change. The news of Kyle's betrayal had shaken his team to the core, but Dwayne was proud of how they had rallied together to keep the business going. It wasn't easy, and there had been a lot of sleepless nights, but they had weathered the storm. Now, it was time for a fresh start. He walked into his office, where Rick was waiting. Rick had been a constant source of support throughout the ordeal, never wavering in his loyalty to Dwayne or the company. "Morning, Dwayne," Rick said, standing as Dwayne entered. "I've been going over the new budget proposals. We're going to need to tighten up a few things for the next quarter, but I think we can make it work." Dwayne nodded. "I was thinking the same. We need to be smart with our resources, especially now. But we can't let the past define us. We have to move forward." Rick raised an eyebrow. "So, what's the plan? What's next for Johnson Motors?" Dwayne took a deep breath, looking out the window at the cars on the lot. The sun was shining, the sky clear. It felt like a new beginning, like the first day of a new chapter. "We're going to rebuild, Rick," Dwayne said, his voice filled with determination. "But we're going to rebuild better. We're going to focus on what makes us stand out, our commitment to quality, our dedication to our customers, and our belief in community. And we're going to do it the right way, with transparency and accountability." Rick smiled. "That's the Dwayne I know. What can I do to help?" "We're going to start with a rebranding," Dwayne said, walking over to his desk and pulling up some documents. "It's time for a fresh identity for Johnson Motors. We'll have to address the scandal publicly, but we'll do it honestly and with integrity. After that, we'll focus on customer outreach, bringing them back to the dealership. They need to know that we're still the same company they've trusted, just better." Rick nodded, clearly on board. "Sounds like a solid plan. And we've got a loyal team behind us. We'll get through this." In the days that followed, Dwayne and Rick met with the marketing team to discuss the rebranding strategy. They worked tirelessly to develop a campaign that would focus on transparency, community involvement, and the values that had always been at the heart of Johnson Motors. They also began reaching out to their customers, offering incentives and promotions to encourage people to return to the dealership. Dwayne was determined to make sure the company's future was built on trust, not just success. He knew that they had to regain the confidence of their customers and employees, and he was willing to put in the work to make that happen. One of the first steps was a public statement. Dwayne addressed the scandal head-on, acknowledging the mistake, expressing his disappointment, and outlining the steps they had taken to ensure something like this would never happen again. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated his honesty, and the company's reputation slowly began to heal. As the weeks turned into months, Johnson Motors started to regain its footing. The rebranding efforts were a success, and customer traffic increased steadily. The employees, many of whom had feared for their jobs in the aftermath of Kyle's actions, were more motivated than ever. Dwayne made it a point to show his appreciation for them regularly, knowing that their support was key to the company's recovery. One evening, as Dwayne was leaving the dealership, he received a text from Rick. "Come by the lot tomorrow morning. I think you'll want to see this." Curious, Dwayne made his way in early the next day. When he arrived, he was met by Rick, who was standing near a shiny, new car on the lot. It was a sleek, high-end model, one that was set to be the centerpiece of their new inventory. "What's going on?" Dwayne asked, his eyes scanning the lot. Rick smiled. "I wanted to show you the new direction we're taking. This car is the first of many, top-of-the-line models, offering quality that reflects the new identity of Johnson Motors. We're going to focus on offering cars that customers can trust, backed by a dealership they can believe in." Dwayne felt a sense of pride wash over him. This was it, the moment where everything came together. The road to recovery had been long, but now they were positioned to not just survive, but thrive. I love it, Dwayne said, walking around the car. This is exactly what we need. Rick clapped him on the back. I think we're on the right track, Dwayne. You've turned this place around. As the year came to a close, Dwayne stood at the front of the dealership once again. But this time, he wasn't just looking at cars. He was looking at the future. The events of the past had shaped him, and they had shaped Johnson Motors. But more importantly, they had taught him that success wasn't just about profits or expansion. It was about integrity, honesty, and building something that lasted. Dwayne smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. There would always be challenges, always be hurdles to overcome. But he was ready. With his team by his side and the lessons he had learned, Dwayne knew that Johnson Motors was stronger than ever. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Dwayne, it was the belief that no matter how hard things got, they could always come back stronger. The key was never giving up, and that, he realized, was the true spirit of Johnson Motors. And with that, he walked forward, ready to face whatever the future held.